Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a little different, and by different I mean absolutely miserable. We're spending a typical week in a 19th century Welsh mining village, where your alarm clock is a knocker-upper tapping your window with a long pole, your commute involves dropping into literal hell, and your retirement plan is, well, not making it to retirement. You'll breathe coal dust, eat coal dust, probably dream about coal dust, and if you're really lucky, you'll live long enough to cough up coal dust in your twilight years. So yeah, you probably won't survive this, but at least you'll learn something while drifting off. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing this community spread across time zones, all of us exploring history together in our own little midnight bubbles. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's Monday, and the darkness outside your window is still absolute. That thick, heavy darkness that comes at 4:30 in the morning when even the rooster is questioning his life choices. You're awake because your body has learned, through months or years of this routine, that sleep is a luxury measured in stolen minutes. The slate floor under your feet is cold enough to make you suck air through your teeth. No wooden floors here, not in a cottage this small, this close to the pit. Just stone and slate and the perpetual chill that seems to seep up from the earth itself. Your cottage, and that's being generous with the word, consists of 2 rooms. The one you're standing in serves as kitchen, living area and dining room, dominated by the iron range that's already being coaxed back to life by your wife. She's been up even earlier than you because the fire needs tending and water needs fetching from the standpipe 3 doors down. The other room is where everyone sleeps. You and your wife in the bed, your 3 children top to tail on the straw mattress on the floor. Privacy is a concept for people who can afford walls. The smell hits you as consciousness fully arrives. Coal smoke from your own fire mixing with coal smoke from every other fire in the terrace, creating a permanent grey fog that settles in the valley like an unwanted guest. Historians still argue whether these 19th century mining villages had worse air quality than the industrial cities, but standing here in your dim kitchen, that debate seems academic at best. You're breathing soup either way. You pull on yesterday's shirt, your only shirt really, unless you count the Sunday one hanging on the peg that's reserved for chapel. The fabric is stiff with dried sweat and coal dust that never quite washes out, no matter how many times it goes through the mangle. Your wife has left, out a bowl of water for washing, but it's barely enough to splash your face and hands. Proper bathing happens Saturday night in the tin tub, and even then you're sharing the water with everyone else, in descending order of importance. By the time the youngest gets in, that water could probably walk itself to the drain. Outside you can hear the village waking up in stages. First the knocker-uppers making their rounds with those long poles. Tap, tap, tap on bedroom windows, a job that exists solely because alarm clocks are expensive and human labour is cheap. Then the doors starting to open, the coughs of men clearing lungs that haven't quite recovered from Saturday. The clatter of boots on cobblestones, the murmur of Welsh conversations, because English is what you speak to the English managers and shopkeepers, but Welsh is what you speak to each other, to your families, to God in chapel. Your wife hands you a mug of weak tea, real tea, not the nettle substitute some families resort to when money's tight, and you cup it in both hands, stealing its warmth. She doesn't say much. There's not much to say on a Monday morning when you both know exactly how the next 6 days will unfold. She'll ask if you remembered your snap tin. You'll nod. She'll tell you to be careful, like carefulness has ever prevented a roof fall or a fire damp explosion. You'll kiss her cheek, taste the worry she doesn't voice, and head out the door. The village is arranged in terraces that climb the valley sides like crude steps, each row of cottages identical to the last. Stone walls blackened by decades of coal smoke, slate roofs at angles that shed rain but trap the grey haze permanently. In the pre-dawn darkness, lit only by the occasional oil lamp in a window, it could almost be picturesque. Almost. Then the light catches the slag heap dominating the valley head, that growing mountain of mining waste that gets taller every year, and you remember exactly what kind of place this is. You join the stream of men heading downhill toward the pit. Hundreds of you, maybe close to 1,000 depending on which shift rotation is working. The sound of boots becomes a rhythm, not quite marching, but not quite shuffling either. Something in between. something tired. Your neighbour, Dafydd, falls into step beside you, and you nod at each other in that economical way men have when words feel like too much effort this early. The pithead wheel is already turning, visible now as a silhouette against the slowly lightening eastern sky. That wheel, iron and enormous and relentless, is what hauls the cage up and down, carrying men into the earth and coal out of it. The sound of it, that rhythmic creaking and clanking, is the heartbeat of the village. When it stops, everyone stops. When it turns, life continues. And it's turning now, waiting for you. The lane leading down to the pit is less a proper road and more a suggestion of one, a track worn into the hillside by thousands of boots over the years, rutted by coal carts and perpetually muddy regardless of the weather. Even in high summer, when the rest of Wales might be enjoying something resembling dryness, this path retains a slick coating of coal dust turned to sludge that makes every step a negotiation with gravity. You've learned to walk with your weight slightly forward, knees bent, ready to catch yourself. New men fall. Experienced men just look perpetually off balance. The crowd thickens as more terraces empty their men into the flow. You recognise most of them. How could you not in a village of maybe 1,500 souls, where the pit employs virtually every able-bodied man over the age of 12? There's Evan from 2 streets over who lost 3 fingers last year but still works the haulage. Owen the butty who always has a story about the old days, when coal seams ran thick as a man's height and you could stand upright while working. Young Tom who just started last month and still has that eager look that won't survive till Christmas. The conversations around you are a mixture of Welsh and English, sometimes mid-sentence, shifting languages the way you'd shift a tool from one hand to another. Clywaisis, did you hear about the cave-in over at CWM Colliery? Marpel in terrible shape, I'm telling you. The Welsh flows easier, feels more natural in your mouth, but the English creeps in with technical terms and the vocabulary of coal that's been imported along with the English managers and their systems. You pass the first slag heap, and calling it a heap is like calling the ocean damp. This is a mountain of waste, hundreds of feet of crushed rock and coal tailings and general mining debris that's been piling up since your grandfather's time. It smokes slightly where deep pockets of discarded coal smoulder in eternal sullen combustion. Nothing grows on it. Nothing can. Historians still argue whether these slag heaps pose more danger from collapse or from the toxic runoff that poisons streams and wells, but standing in their shadow, you're not particularly interested in academic debates about which form of environmental disaster is more problematic. The sky's lighter now, that pre-dawn grey that turns everything into silhouettes and suggestions. You can see the full extent of the pithead works, not just the wheel, but the engine house that powers it, the lamp room where you'll collect your candle, the screens where boys pick slate from coal, the offices where men in cleaner clothes make decisions about your life underground. The wheel itself is massive, maybe 30 feet in diameter, and the sound it makes is a constant mechanical heartbeat. Creak, groan, clank, creak, groan, clank. If you had to pick a sound that defined your existence, this would be it. Smoke rises from 6 chimneys across the complex, the engine room boilers, the blacksmith forge, the lamp room furnace, combined with the perpetual haze from hundreds of domestic fires in the village behind you. The whole valley sits under a permanent grey blanket. Modern air quality experts would probably have a collective breakdown if they could measure the particulate count here, but you just call it Monday. Your boots are caked with the special mud that only coal country produces. Part earth, part coal dust, part mystery chemicals from the processing works. You've got one pair for the pit and one for chapel, and never the twain shall meet. Your pit boots are held together with wire and optimism, the leather so saturated with water and coal oil that they're basically waterproof through sheer stubbornness. They'll last maybe another 6 months if you're lucky, and then you'll be buying new ones from the company store at prices that would make a highway robber blush. Beautiful morning in it, Dafydd says beside you, and you can't tell if he's being sarcastic or if he's genuinely found some beauty in this industrial hellscape. Welsh miners have a peculiar sense of humour. You have to, really, or you'd go mad. The joke is that on Sunday, preachers tell you about hell and damnation, but Monday through Saturday you clock in for the real thing. You're close enough now to see individual faces at the pit entrance. The timekeeper with his ledger and his pocket watch, marking down who's late and who's early, with equal grim efficiency. The overman who assigns the day's work locations, sending experienced men to the difficult faces and new boys to the hauling routes. The ostler checking on the pit ponies that spend their entire lives underground, blind from birth or close enough, pulling coal drams through tunnels they navigate by memory and routine. There's a quirky superstition practiced by some of the older miners. They won't enter the pit on the first Monday of the month without spitting 3 times over their left shoulder. Something about warding off accidents or bad luck or the devil himself, depending on who's telling the story. You're not particularly superstitious, but you've seen enough men carried out on stretchers that you're not about to judge anyone's protective rituals. The pithead wheel looms larger as you approach, its shadow falling across the crowd of waiting miners. In a few minutes, you'll be passing through those gates, collecting your lamp, descending into the earth. But for now, in this grey dawn light, with the wheel turning and the village waking and the slag heaps smoking behind you, you're still topside, still in the world of air and sky, still breathing relatively clean. The lamp room is a study in controlled chaos. You shuffle forward in line with dozens of other men, each waiting to collect your numbered safety lamp, a Davy lamp if you're lucky, a glorified candle in a wire cage if you're not. The lampman checks your tally number against his board, hands you lamp number 47, and makes a mark in his ledger. This lamp is now your responsibility. If you break it, you pay for it. If you lose it, you pay more. If it goes out while you're underground and you somehow manage to relight it yourself rather than walking back to the shaft in pitch darkness, you'll probably get fined for that too. The lamp itself is deceptively simple. A wick, oil, and a wire mesh that's supposed to prevent the flame from igniting explosive gases. The Davy lamp was a genuine revolution when it was invented back in 1815, allowing miners to work in areas that would previously have been instant death traps. Of course, what the safety lamp actually did was allow mine owners to send you into even more dangerous seams, so you're not entirely sure who benefited from that particular innovation. Historians still argue whether the Davy lamp actually reduced mining deaths, or just changed how men died, which is the kind of academic question that feels a lot more pressing when you're holding the lamp in question. Outside the lamp room, you join the crowd gathering at the shaft entrance. The pit opening is maybe 15 feet square, lined with timber that's dark with age and moisture, and it drops away into absolute blackness. A safety fence surrounds it, not to stop you from falling in accidentally, but to keep the drunk men from Saturday night from wandering into oblivion on Sunday evening. Not that it always works. The cage arrives with a metallic shriek that never gets less unsettling. It's essentially a platform with waist-high rails, maybe 8 feet by 6, designed to carry 12 to 15 men per trip. The banksman, the man who controls the cage loading, starts gesturing men forward. You crowd in with your section shoulder to shoulder, the lamp flames guttering with the movement. Young Tom is in your group and you can see his throat working as he swallows nervously. First month jitters. You remember those. "Don't worry, boyo," Duffid says cheerfully. "If the cable snaps, you won't feel a thing." This is the kind of reassurance miners specialize in. Technically true, completely unhelpful, mildly terrifying. Tom's face suggests he's not comforted. The banksman rings the bell system. 1 ring means stop, 2 means descend, 3 means emergency. 2 bells echo down the shaft and the cage lurches into motion. Your stomach does that little flip it always does at the start of the descent. That moment where your body's absolutely convinced you're falling and your brain has to remind it that no, this is intentional, this is fine, this is just your Monday morning commute to hell. The daylight above shrinks to a square, then a rectangle, then a distant star. The temperature drops immediately. That peculiar transition from the relatively warm morning air to the permanent chill of the deep earth. The shaft walls slide past, timber and rock and the occasional side tunnel opening into blackness. Water drips from somewhere, a constant patter that sounds like rain but smells like minerals and rot. Your lamp flame flickers wildly in the descending air. The descent takes maybe 3 minutes, but it feels longer. You drop 400 feet, maybe closer to 500 depending on which level is working today. That's the height of a moderately ambitious cathedral, except you're going down instead of up, and there's no stained glass waiting at the bottom. Just coal. Just darkness. Just the next 10 hours of your life. There's a quirky superstition among some of the men that you should hold your breath for the first 100 feet of descent. Something about preserving your surface air for as long as possible, keeping a piece of the upper world in your lungs. It's nonsense, obviously, but you've caught yourself doing it more than once. The cage slows, then jolts to a stop at the main level. The banksman here, working entirely by feel and signal bells in the darkness, slides the gate open and you stumble out onto the landing. The air down here is different, thick, damp. It tastes like coal dust and timber rot and that peculiar mineral staleness that comes from air that hasn't seen sunlight in geological timescales. You can feel the weight of the earth above you, 400 feet of rock and soil and the village and the slag heaps all pressing down on the timber supports and the coal pillars that hold up your little bubble of empty space. The main level is relatively spacious, maybe 7 feet high, wide enough for the haulage tracks and the ponies that pull the coal drams. But this is the highway, the main artery. The actual coal faces where you'll be working are reached through side tunnels that get progressively smaller, lower, more cramped as you move away from the shaft. The underground supervisor, the fireman, though he fights gas explosions, not building fires, is waiting with his assignments. He checks his board, glances at you and your butty David, and jerks his thumb toward the western reaches. Number 4 seam, 3rd crosscut, roof's shaky, mind yourselves. This is the extent of your safety briefing. A location and a warning that yes, the tons of rock above your head might decide to relocate themselves onto your skull at any moment. You nod, collect your mandrel and pick from the tool station, and head off into the tunnels with David. Your lamp throws dancing shadows on the walls, creating the illusion of movement where there is none. The sound of the shaft wheel is distant now, replaced by the drip of water, the creak of timber, the scuffle of your boots on the coal dust floor. Somewhere ahead, you can hear the rhythmic clank of picks on coal. The day shift is already started, which means you're slightly late, which means a potential fine you can't afford. You pick up your pace, hunching as the roof gets lower. Welcome to work. The 3rd crosscut narrows as you go deeper into the western workings. What started as a relatively comfortable 7-foot ceiling has dropped to 5 feet, then 4, and now you're hunched over like a question mark, your back already protesting, and you haven't even started swinging your pick yet. The tunnel floor is uneven, lumps of coal and rock that haven't been cleared, puddles of water that reflect your lamplight like black mirrors, and the occasional timber prop that seems to be holding up the entire mountain through sheer willpower and prayer. Your coal face is at the end of this particular tunnel, where the seam of anthracite runs through the rock like a dark vein. And when you arrive, the reality of your workspace becomes abundantly clear. The seam height is maybe 3 feet. 3 feet of coal between the floor and the roof, which means you'll spend the next 10 hours on your knees, on your side, or in some twisted combination of both that will make standing up straight tomorrow morning an exercise in agony. David grunts as he drops to his knees beside you. Cozy, in it? He's already pulling off his jacket because within 5 minutes of swinging a pick in this confined space, you'll be sweating like it's August regardless of the underground chill. You follow suit, stripping down to your shirt sleeves, hanging your jacket on a timber prop where the damp will probably make it even more unpleasant to put back on later. The coal face itself is a wall of black stretching maybe 15 feet across your section. Your job, yours and David's as a 2-man butty team, is to hew out as much coal as you can in your shift. You're paid by the ton, not by the hour, which means every swing of your mandrel translates directly into whether your family eats well this week or scrapes by on bread and dripping. It's the kind of motivational system that sounds great to the mine owners and feels less great when your arms are screaming and you're only halfway through your shift. You position yourself on your side, the only way to get leverage in this height, and swing your pick at the coal face. The impact sends a shock up your arms, and a chunk of coal about the size of your fist breaks free. This is going to be a long day. The technique is actually quite specific. You're not just hacking away randomly, you need to undercut the seam first, creating a void at the bottom so the coal above will fracture and fall away more easily. It's called holing, and it requires you to essentially lie on your side and swing upward into the seam, creating a horizontal cut maybe 2 feet deep. The physical mechanics of this are exactly as terrible as they sound. You're lying in coal dust and muddy water, swinging a 7-pound pick in a space where you can't get a full arc, using muscles in your shoulders and back that weren't designed for this angle of attack. Historians still argue whether the long-term spinal damage suffered by coal miners was worse in narrow seams, like this, or in the deeper mines where roof falls were more common, but honestly, you're collecting both types of injury simultaneously. The sound in the confined space is overwhelming. Each pick strike rings out with a sharp crack that echoes off the closed walls. Multiply that by a dozen other men working nearby faces, add the rumble of coal drams being hauled past on the haulage road, the occasional shout and the perpetual drip, drip, drip of water seeping through the roof, and you've got a symphony in the key of industrial misery. A pit pony appears in your peripheral vision, hauling a dram along the rails that run through the haulage tunnel behind you. The pony is maybe 12 hands high, a Welsh mountain breed that's spent so long underground its coat has lost any pretense of colour and settled into a uniform grey-black. The boy leading it, a hurrier, maybe 10 years old, is bare-chested despite the chill, his skin dark with coal dust except where sweat has run in rivulets down his ribs. He doesn't look at you. You don't look at him. Everyone has their misery to attend to. There's a quirky practice among some of the ponies that's both heartbreaking and oddly touching. After a few years underground, if they're brought to the surface for any reason, they panic in the open air and sunlight. They've adapted so completely to their cave existence that freedom becomes terrifying. You've seen it happen. A pony brought up for veterinary treatment, trembling and rolling its eyes at the sky like it's seeing a monster. Makes you wonder what adaptations you've made that you haven't noticed yet. After about an hour of holing, you've created enough of an undercut that you can start working the face properly. You shift to your knees, which complains loudly about the change, and begin attacking the coal seam at a steeper angle. The goal is to create fractures that run back into the seam, using the coal's natural cleavage planes to break out larger chunks, rather than reducing everything to powder. Good coal hewers can read the seam, spot the fracture lines, place their picks precisely. You're decent. Not the best in the pit, but far from the worst. Daffod is working the face to your left. The rhythm of his pick strikes creating a counterpoint to yours. You fall into a kind of trance. Swing, impact, breathe, swing, impact, breathe. Your lamp flame gutters with each exertion, casting wild shadows. Coal dust hangs in the air, visible in the lamplight like a dark fog. You're breathing it with every gasp. It's coating your throat, your lungs, settling into tissue that will eventually turn black and stiff and useless. The mainstream historical fact that everyone knows about Victorian coal mining is that it was dangerous. But what's less discussed is just how calculated those dangers were. The mine owners knew exactly how dangerous each seam was, exactly what the mortality rates were, and they made cold economic calculations about how much safety equipment and timber support was worth installing versus how much they'd pay out in compensation for dead miners. Your life has been reduced to a line item in someone's ledger. You become aware of time passing only because your body starts insisting on it. Your back is screaming. Your shoulders feel like they've been worked over with a hammer. Your throat is raw from breathing coal dust, and there's a persistent ache behind your eyes from squinting in the lamplight. When Daffod finally sits back on his heels and wipes his forehead with a hand that just spreads more coal dust around, you realise you've been working for close to 5 hours straight. "Dinner time, I reckon," he says, which is what everyone calls the midday meal, even though it's probably closer to 11 in the morning by now. Time is strange underground. Without the sun or a watch, and who can afford a watch? You measure your day in physical exhaustion and the gradual emptying of your lamp oil. When your lamp starts to dim, you know you're getting close to the end of your shift. When your stomach starts eating itself, you know it's time for your crust. You retrieve your snap tin from where you left it near the tunnel entrance. A metal container about the size of a small book, dented and scratched from years of use. The tin serves two purposes. It keeps your food relatively clean from coal dust, and it prevents the rats from getting it. Well, prevents is a strong word. Discourages might be more accurate. The rats down here are bold and numerous and absolutely shameless in their approach to food acquisition. Inside the tin, 2 thick slices of bread with a scraping of butter and a lump of cheese about the size of your thumb. This is what your wife packed for you before dawn, and this is what you'll eat. No hot food underground. The mine owners tried that once, setting up a warming station, but the cost combined with the logistical nightmare of getting hot food to men scattered across miles of tunnels killed the experiment. So you eat cold food in the cold damp, and you're grateful to have it. You find a relatively dry spot against the tunnel wall, relatively being the operative word since truly dry doesn't exist down here, and slide down to sit with your back against the rock. The position would be restful if your back wasn't already protesting the morning's contortions. Daffod settles beside you, producing his own snap tin with the theatrical flair of a magician revealing his final trick. "What have you got today, then?" he asks, which is the traditional opening to mealtime conversation. You've been working together for 3 years, and you know exactly what he's got. The same thing he always has, the same thing everyone has, but the ritual of asking is part of the break. "Bread and cheese. You?" "Bread and cheese. Living like kings we are." He bites into his bread, chews thoughtfully. "Though my Megan's bread is definitely better than your Catherine's. No offence. Your Megan's bread could double as roof support timber, and everyone knows it. This is a lie. Megan makes excellent bread. But the insult is part of the ritual too. You've both agreed long ago that mealtimes require either gossip or gentle mockery to be tolerable. The bread is dry and dense, the way bread gets when it's made with more economy than the enthusiasm. The cheese is sharp enough to make your eyes water slightly, which is probably intentional. Strong flavours cut through the coal dust coating your tongue. You eat slowly, partly to make the food last and partly because rapid eating on an exhausted, empty stomach is a recipe for feeling worse, not better. A rat appears from a crack in the tunnel wall, nose twitching. It's a big one, maybe 8 inches, not counting the tail, with that sleek, well-fed look that underground rats develop. These aren't the starving, desperate creatures you might find in city slums. These are professional scavengers operating in an environment rich with dropped food, spilled grain from the horse feed, and the occasional dead pony to feast on. Historians still argue whether pit rats actually helped miners by providing early warning of gas build-ups or whether they were purely parasitic. But sitting here watching this one-eye your cheese with calculation, you're leaning toward parasitic. "Shoo," you say without much conviction. The rat doesn't move. You break off a tiny piece of bread and toss it down the tunnel. The rat scampers after it, and you get to finish your cheese in peace. This is the bargain you've all silently agreed to with the rat population. Tribute in exchange for not having them crawl over you while you eat. Dafydd produces a small flask from his pocket. Water, not alcohol. Though there are definitely miners who bring something stronger and pay for it with accidents in the afternoon, he takes a swig and passes it to you. The water tastes like metal from the flask and has that peculiar mineral edge that all underground water seems to acquire, but it washes down the bread and cheese and helps settle the coal dust in your throat. "Did you hear about the Davies boy?" Dafydd asks. "The one working over in the eastern seam?" You haven't, but you brace yourself because news that starts this way is never good news. Roof fall yesterday evening caught his leg. They had to dig him out. Dafydd shakes his head. They're saying he might lose it. The leg? Aye. Doctor came down and everything. 16 years old and that's him done for life. Can't work the pit with one leg. This is the kind of news that circulates through the mine daily. Who got hurt? How badly? Whether they'll work again. It's not morbid curiosity. It's intelligence gathering. You need to know which sections are dangerous, which supervisors cut corners on timber, which faces are showing signs of instability. The Davies boys accident tells you the eastern seam is having roof problems, which means you're slightly grateful to be in the western workings. Today, even if your current seam height is testing your spine's structural integrity, there's a quirky tradition in some Welsh pits of leaving small offerings for the mine spirits, a piece of bread, a button, a nail, at tunnel intersections or near particularly dangerous sections. The knockers, they're called, these supposed underground spirits that either warn of danger or cause it, depending on which story you're hearing. You're a chapel-going man and shouldn't believe in such pagan nonsense, but you've definitely noticed that abandoned tunnels make sounds, tapping, knocking, creaking, that your rational mind attributes to settling rock, and your nervous system attributes to something else entirely. The afternoon shift stretches longer than the morning somehow, despite being exactly the same number of hours. Maybe it's because your body is already exhausted, or because the novelty of Monday has worn off, and you're left with just the grinding reality of pick, swing, breathe until your lamp oil starts to run low and the flame gutters toward darkness. You've filled maybe 4 drams with coal, decent output for a seam this height, though not spectacular. Each dram holds about half a ton, which means you and Dafydd have collectively hewed out roughly 2 tons today. At the current rate of 1 shilling and 6pence per ton, you're looking at maybe 3 shillings for the day's work, except you have to split that with Dafydd, and there'll be deductions for lamp rental, tool sharpening, mysterious fines for imaginary infractions, and a percentage taken for the coal that's too small to sell. By the time it's all calculated, you'll probably clear 1 shilling 3pence. Maybe The mathematics of poverty are depressingly precise down here. The fireman comes through on his evening inspection, checking roof supports and testing for gas with his lamp flame. If the flame burns blue or elongates, that's fire damp, methane gas that can explode with the slightest spark. If the flame goes out entirely, that's black damp, carbon dioxide that suffocates without warning. If the flame burns normal, that's just regular deadly coal mine air, which is apparently the best case scenario. He grunts at your section, prods a timber prop with his stick and moves on. In fireman speak, a grunt means everything's acceptable. Actual words would indicate a problem. Your back has moved past pain and into a kind of numb acceptance. Tomorrow it'll hurt worse. The second day after unusual exertion is always the worst, but for now it's achieved a state of stoic resignation. Your hands are another matter. Despite years of calluses, you can feel new blisters forming where the pick handle has rubbed in slightly different spots than usual. You'll lance them tonight with a hot needle, drain the fluid, and wrap your hands in rag bandages for tomorrow. This is the routine. Finally, you hear the bell system ringing through the tunnels. 5 bells. End of shift. The sound triggers something Pavlovian in your exhausted body. You're not done, of course. You still have to gather your tools, make your way back to the main level, wait for the cage and ride up to the surface. But the actual coal hewing part of your day is over, and that's victory enough. You and Daffyd collect your mandrels and picks, hanging them on the designated hooks in the tool station. Tomorrow's shift will collect them, use them, hang them back up. The tools are communal, tracked by number rather than individual ownership. Your lamp, nearly empty now, still has enough oil to light your way back through the tunnels to the shaft. The walk back is always faster than the walk in, even though you're more exhausted. Anticipation of surface air, probably. The tunnels are full of men heading in the same direction, a reverse flood of blackened humanity shuffling toward the shaft. Conversations are minimal. Everyone's too tired, too ready to be done. The sound is just boots on coal, breathing the occasional cough. At the main level, you join the queue for the cage. There's a quirky hierarchy to this that nobody officially acknowledges but everyone observes. Injured men go first, then men with long walks home, then everyone else in a rough order of seniority. You're mid-range on all counts, so you wait. The cage comes and goes, carrying its loads of exhausted men upward toward the fading daylight. When it's finally your turn, you crowd in with the others. The ascent is faster than the descent. The empty cage is lighter, easier to haul up. You watch the shaft walls slide past in reverse, timbers and rock and darkness giving way to the growing square of sky above. The temperature shifts from underground chill to evening cool. You can smell the surface, coal smoke and slag heap sulfur and the organic rot of the valley, but after 10 hours of pure mineral staleness, it smells like freedom. The cage lurches to a stop at the surface, and the banksman slides the gate open. You stumble out onto solid ground, and the first breath of surface air hits your lungs. The light, even the wheat grey twilight of a Welsh valley evening, makes you squint after the dimness of lamplight. The sky is overcast, threatening rain, and it's the most beautiful thing you've seen all day. You join the line at the lamp house to return your lamp and collect your tally sticks, small pieces of metal or wood with your worker number stamped on them. You'll turn these in at the pay office on Saturday, proof of days worked. The system is designed to be impossible to cheat. The timekeeper records when you arrive, the lampman records when you take and return your lamp, the overman records where you worked, and the weighman records how much coal you produced. Every step documented, every potential penny accounted for. Outside the pit gates, the village spreads up the hillside in its terraces of identical cottages, windows beginning to glow with lamplight. As families light their evening fires, you can see the chapel spire above the roofline, solid and judgmental. The slag heap smokes quietly to itself. A few women wait by the gates, wives checking that their men have survived another day, or delivering messages about sick children or visiting relatives. You don't see Catherine, which is normal. She'll be home managing the evening routine. Fire tended, children fed, water heated for your bath if you're lucky. The walk home is maybe 10 minutes uphill, and you take it slowly because your legs have forgotten how to navigate terrain that isn't horizontal tunnel floor. Your reflection in a shop window catches you off guard. You're completely black. Face, hands, clothes, everything is coal dust. Only your eyes show any colour, and even those are red-rimmed from the dust and dim light. You look like a creature from folklore, a coal-black ghost stumbling through the twilight. Tomorrow you'll look exactly the same, and the day after that, and every day until you either die in the pit or survive long enough to die of black lung outside it. Home is close now. You can see smoke from your chimney. You arrive home to find the cottage in its perpetual state of managed chaos. Catherine is at the range, stirring something in the iron pot that smells like leeks and potatoes. Cool, probably, stretching Sunday's mutton bone into Tuesday's dinner through the magic of Welsh cooking that transforms very little into almost enough. Your eldest daughter, Marie, is on her knees scrubbing the slate floor for what is probably the third time today. The battle against coal dust is never won, only temporarily stalemated. "Da's home," announces your youngest, Gwilym, stating the obvious with the confidence of a 6-year-old who hasn't yet learned that some observations don't require voicing. He's sitting at the table practicing his letters on a piece of slate, tongue poking out in concentration. The chapel Sunday school insists on literacy, and Catherine enforces it with the same iron will she applies to everything else in this household. "Boots," Catherine says without turning around, which is her standard greeting. "You're already unlacing them, you know the rules. Pit boots stay by the door, never venture further into the cottage than the stone entranceway. You pad into the main room in your stockings, which are also black with coal dust but at least won't track fresh mud across Mary's recently scrubbed floor. The tin bath is already positioned in front of the fire, steam rising from the water Catherine's been heating in kettles. Tuesday isn't official bath night, that's Saturday, but she's taken pity on you. Or more likely, she can't stand another evening of coal dust transferring from your body to the furniture, to the children, to everything else in a perpetual cycle of grime. "Girls are fetching more water," she says, ladling hot water from the kettle into the tub. "You've got maybe 10 minutes before it's cold again." Your middle daughter, Nest, pushes through the door backwards, hauling a bucket of water from the standpipe. She's 13, old enough to work in the sorting sheds at the pit, but Catherine has fought tooth and nail to keep her in school for another year. It's a losing battle. The money from a working daughter would ease the constant financial tightness. But Catherine is stubborn about education, in a way that both admires and occasionally frustrates you. You strip off your shirt and Catherine makes a disapproving sound at the state of it. The fabric is stiff with dried sweat and coal dust, and there's a new tear in the shoulder seam that wasn't there yesterday morning. "That's the 3rd shirt this month," she says, which isn't quite true but also isn't quite false. Pit work is hard on clothes. Hell, pit work is hard on everything. The bathwater is hot enough to make you hiss as you climb in, but it feels like heaven after 10 hours underground. You're hunched in the tub. It's sized for efficiency, not comfort, but the heat soaks into your protesting muscles, and for a few minutes you just sit there with your eyes closed, breathing. Steam instead of coal dust. Catherine hands you the soap, homemade lye soap that she and the neighbouring women produce in bulk every few months. Harsh enough to strip coal dust and probably a layer of skin along with it. You scrub at your face, your arms, watching the water turn black almost immediately. There's a quirky practice some mining wives follow, of saving the first wash water from their husbands' baths and using it to dye fabric. The coal dust creates a deep black that doesn't fade. Catherine tried it once, produced a set of black curtains that now hang in the bedroom window, blocking draught and light with equal efficiency. "Daffyd's wife came by today," Catherine says, taking your discarded shirt and dropping it into the washing bucket with the resignation of someone who knows exactly how much scrubbing that represents. Her youngest has the cough again. The cough. It's how everyone refers to the constellation of respiratory ailments that plague mining villages. Whooping cough, consumption, the lung fever that carries off children and adults with equal enthusiasm. In an environment where everyone breathes coal smoke from birth, and half the population spends their days underground breathing coal dust, respiratory health is more aspiration than reality. Bad, you ask? Bad enough she's worried. Not bad enough for the doctor yet. Which is its own calculation. Doctor visits cost money they don't have, but waiting too long costs children. The mathematics of poverty apply to medical care too. Mary has abandoned the floor scrubbing and started on the laundry, attacking your pit trousers with a scrubbing brush in what looks like pure fury. This is the work that doesn't make it into romantic notions of domestic life. The brutal physical labour of keeping a coal miner's family in clean clothes. Historians still argue whether washing pit clothes or working in the mine itself was more physically demanding. And watching Mary's shoulders work, you're genuinely not sure. The process is specific and unforgiving. First, the clothes get scraped to remove the worst of the dried mud and coal. Then they soak in cold water to loosen the embedded dust. Then they're scrubbed with lye soap on a washboard until your knuckles bleed. Then rinsed. Then scrubbed again, because the first scrubbing never gets it all. Then rinsed again. Then wrung out with a mangle if you're lucky enough to own one, or by hand if you're not. Then hung to dry, which in Welsh weather means they'll probably be damp until next Monday. And this happens every single day, because you only own 2 sets of pit clothes and you wear one while the other is being washed. The garden's coming along, Catherine mentions, which is her way of making conversation while you finish bathing. Potatoes are looking good, cabbage too, though the slugs are persistent. The vegetable patch behind the cottage is maybe 10 feet by 15 feet of grudgingly productive soil that Catherine has coaxed into, providing supplements to the family diet. Potatoes, cabbage, leeks, onions, runner beans, nothing fancy, nothing that requires delicate care, everything chosen for hardiness and yield. The mainstream historical fact that everyone knows is that working-class Victorian families survived largely on bread and potatoes, but what's less discussed is the grinding daily labour required to produce even those humble crops in soil that's been poisoned by decades of coal smoke and slag heap runoff. You finish your bath and dress in your house clothes, trousers and a shirt that are merely dingy rather than actively black. Catherine ladles out bowls of caul for everyone, and you gather around the table in that choreographed dance that families perfect over years. The children get their portions first, then you, then Catherine serves herself last with whatever's left. The caul is thin, more broth than substance, but it's hot and fills the hollow space in your stomach that bread and cheese at midday left behind. Tomorrow, after your shift, you'll need to visit the company store, the Tommy shop, everyone calls it, though nobody's quite sure why. Maybe after some long-dead manager named Thomas, or maybe it's rhyming slang for some term that's been forgotten. Either way, it's the shop that the mine company owns, the shop where you're expected to purchase your necessities, the shop that has you by the financial throat. The truck system is a masterpiece of economic exploitation dressed up as convenience. Here's how it works. You get paid in a combination of actual money and truck tokens, metal coins stamped with the company name that are only accepted at the company store. The ratio varies depending on how the owners are feeling, but it's usually about half and half. So if you earned 3 shillings this week, you might get 1 shilling 6pence in real money and 1 shilling 6pence in tokens. The tokens can only be spent at the Tommy shop, which charges prices that would make a London shopkeeper blush. A loaf of bread that costs 3pence in town costs 5pence at the company store. Sugar, tea, candles, soap, everything carries a markup of anywhere from 30 to 50%. And if you try to walk to the next village to shop somewhere cheaper, well, the mine owners tend to notice that kind of disloyalty and suddenly your shifts get reduced or you're assigned to the most dangerous faces. It gets better. The company store also runs a credit system. Can't afford this week's groceries with your tokens and wages? No problem. Buy on tick, pay it back next week. Except next week you still can't afford it, so you buy on tick again, and the debt grows like a particularly aggressive fungus. There are men in this village who haven't seen actual cash money in years, because their entire wages go toward paying off company store debt that never quite disappears. Historians still argue whether the truck system was more economically damaging than the low wages themselves, or whether they were just different expressions of the same exploitation. From where you're sitting, eating thin caul and calculating whether you can afford new boots next month, the distinction feels academic. The mainstream historical fact that everyone learns is that the Truck Acts of 1831 and 1887 made it illegal to pay workers entirely in tokens or goods. What's less commonly taught is that the mine owners found approximately 73 creative ways around those laws, and the enforcement was so lax that companies continued the practice well into the 1890s with minimal consequences. The fine for breaking the Truck Act was often less than the profit made from running the company store, so it became just another business expense. There's a quirky tradition in some mining families of keeping their truck tokens after they've left the industry, drilling holes in them and wearing them as necklaces or pocket pieces, turning symbols of economic bondage into family heirlooms. You've seen old men in chapel with these tokens on watch chains, though whether they're being ironic or sentimental is hard to determine. Tomorrow you'll join the queue at the Tommy shop, probably just after your shift ends when exhaustion makes it hard to calculate whether the prices are fair. The shop itself is attached to the company offices, a brick building that's notably nicer than any of the workers' cottages. Inside, shelves hold the basics: flour, Oats, tea, sugar, candles, lamp oil, soap, salt, dried goods. Nothing fresh, nothing fancy, nothing that would require actual care or variety. Behind the counter, the clerk, a man named Jenkins, who somehow manages to look down his nose at everyone despite being employed by the same company, will total up your purchases with theatrical slowness, making note of every item in his ledger. If you're buying on credit, he'll make an additional note in red ink, because apparently your debt needs to be colour-coded for maximum shame. The worst part is that you genuinely do need to shop there for some things. Lamp oil, for instance. The mine requires you to use their specific blend, purchased from their store, or you can't take a lamp underground. Mining tools need to be company approved, purchased from company suppliers, at company prices. It's a closed loop, the economic ecosystem where every pound that enters immediately circles back to the owners. Catherine is better at navigating this than you are. She's learned which items are worth buying in town with real money, flour, tea, sugar, and which aren't worth the markup fight. She's learned to barter with neighbours, trading her excellent bread for their excess eggs or vegetables. She's learned to make soap and candles at home when possible, cutting out that expense entirely. The domestic economy she manages is a masterclass in making almost nothing last almost long enough. We'll need candles before Sunday, she mentions now, which is her way of adding to the mental shopping list you're compiling. And Gwilym needs new stockings. His toes are coming through. You nod, calculating. Candles, stockings, the lamp oil you'll definitely need by Thursday. Maybe some tea if there's anything left after the necessities. You're already in debt at the Tommy shop to the tune of about 7 shillings. Not catastrophic, but not comfortable either. This week's purchases will add another 3 or 4 shillings probably, and your wages will cover maybe 2 of that. The debt grows. It always grows. There's a saying in the village, born in debt, live in debt, die in debt, and your children inherit the rest. It's meant as dark humour, but like most jokes down here, it's just truth wearing a thin disguise. You've heard of families where 3 generations are all employed by the same mine, all shopping at the same company store, all carrying the same debt that passes from father to son like the family name. Wednesday morning arrives with the same pre-dawn darkness, the same knocker-uppers tap, the same cold slate floor under your feet. The only difference is that your back hurts worse than it did Monday. Second-day muscle soreness making itself known, and there's a stiffness in your shoulders that suggests the rest of the week will be progressively more painful. This is normal. This is every Wednesday of your life. The descent into the pit follows the same routine, but today the fireman is waiting at the bottom of the shaft with an announcement. Eastern seam's flooded, he says flatly. Pump's broken, won't be fixed till Friday. We're redistributing everyone to the western workings. This is both good news and bad news. Good because it means you're staying in familiar territory, rather than being sent to an unknown section. Bad because it means the western workings will be crowded with extra men, which means more competition for coal tonnage, which means your earnings this week just took a potential hit. But more immediately, it's a reminder that the mine is actively trying to kill you in approximately 15 different ways simultaneously, and today you're going to be intimately aware of all of them. The first and most obvious danger is the roof. Above your head, right now, is approximately 400 feet of rock, soil, clay, and the entire village with its slag heaps and chapels and company stores. This mass is held up by A. Coal seams that haven't been mined yet, B. Timber props that may or may not be adequate, and C. Hope, mostly hope. The roof is under constant pressure, constantly settling, constantly looking for excuses to fall on your head. You can hear it working as you walk through the tunnels, creaks and groans and the occasional sharp crack that makes everyone freeze and look up nervously. Sometimes the timber props telegraph their stress with a sound miners call speaking, a kind of prolonged groan as the wood fibres compress under load. When a prop starts speaking loudly, you have maybe seconds to minutes before it fails. Maybe. The science of structural failure in underground mining is still more art than engineering in 1870. Roof falls are the leading cause of death in Welsh coal mines, accounting for roughly 40% of fatalities according to the statistics that mine owners are legally required to report and definitely don't falsify at all. The mainstream historical fact is that Victorian mines were poorly supported compared to modern standards. But what that dry statement doesn't convey is the visceral terror of hearing rock crack above you in the darkness and knowing you might not be fast enough to escape. There's a quirky superstition that whistling underground causes roof falls, something about the vibrations disturbing the rock or angering the knockers, depending on who's explaining it. It's nonsense, obviously, but you've noticed that nobody whistles down here anyway. Some taboos don't need rational justification. Today you're working in a section where the roof is particularly lively, which is the pleasantly euphemistic term miners use for actively terrifying. You can see hairline cracks in the rock above the coal seam, and there's a constant patter of small stones and dust falling like malevolent snow. Every 15 minutes or so, a larger chunk drops with a thud that makes your heart attempt escape velocity. Dafydd eyes the roof nervously. Should we tell the fireman? And say what? The roof is cracked. Every roof in this pit is cracked. You're not being cavalier, you're being realistic. If miners refused to work under cracked roofs, the entire industry would shut down. The acceptable level of danger is calibrated to keep the coal flowing, not to keep you alive. You've barely started work when you notice a new danger. Water. Not the usual seepage and dripping, but actual water flowing along the tunnel floor, maybe 2 inches deep and rising. This is overflow from the flooded eastern seam finding new routes through the interconnected workings. In a properly engineered mine, this wouldn't be possible. But proper engineering costs money that could otherwise go to shareholders, so here we are standing in rising water while hewing coal. Water in the mine brings its own special problems beyond the obvious wetness. It softens the coal, making it harder to break cleanly. It rots the timber supports faster, it creates slipping hazards, and most dangerously, it can hide roof falls and tunnel collapses until you walk into them in the dark. But water is at least something you can see and feel. The truly terrifying dangers are the invisible ones. Fire damp, methane gas that seeps from the coal seams, is odourless, colourless, and explosively reactive to any spark or flame. The Davy lamp you're carrying is supposed to detect it. The flame changes colour or height in the presence of gas. But historians still argue whether the Davy lamp saved more lives or just gave miners false confidence to work in gaseous seams. From your perspective, carrying a naked flame into an environment full of explosive gas seems like a design flaw. But what do you know? You just work here. The fireman makes his rounds every few hours, testing for gas in different sections. His methodology is scientific. Hold the lamp up high where gas accumulates, watch the flame. If it burns blue or shoots upward, evacuate immediately. If it burns normal, continue risking your life. It's a binary system with no margin for error, and you've heard stories, everyone has, about entire shifts being killed when someone's lamp ignited a pocket of fire damp that had built up overnight. Orchestrated remaining mining hazards within word constraints. I need to continue with the dangers. I've covered roof falls, flooding, and started on fire damp. I still need to cover black damp and wrap up this section. I'm at about 900 words, so I have about 100 words left to complete this section properly. Then there's black damp, carbon dioxide that displaces oxygen in low-lying areas or poorly ventilated sections. Unlike fire damp, which announces itself by exploding, black damp just quietly suffocates you. The lamp goes out first, which is your warning. If you notice, if you're paying attention, if you haven't just assumed it's your lamp oil running low. There's a case from last year, Mynyd Colliery, 3 miles over, where a team of men walked into a black damp pocket in an abandoned working. First man's lamp went out. Second man went to check on him. His lamp went out. Third man went to check on both of them. You can see where this is going. They found all 5 of them the next day, curled up in the darkness like sleeping children. Cheerful thoughts for a Wednesday, Dafydd mutters, and you realise you've been staring at your lamp flame with more intensity than the situation warrants. Just making sure we're not about to explode or suffocate, you say. You know, the usual. The water is ankle deep now. Your boots are completely soaked, and you can feel the cold seeping through to your feet. This is going to be a long day. The rising water means you need to move to a higher section, which brings you past one of the trap doors that control ventilation flow through the mine. Sitting beside it, on a small wooden stool in near total darkness, is a boy who can't be more than 8 years old. His job, his entire existence for the next 10 hours, is to open this door when he hears a coal dram approaching, then close it after the dram passes. That's it. Sit in darkness, listen. Open door, close door, repeat. He's a trapper, and he's one of the lucky ones because at least he gets to sit down. You remember being that boy. Not this specific boy. His name is probably Dai or Hugh or Evan. because half the boys in Wales share about 5 names. But a boy just like him, sitting in the dark at age 7, because your family needed the pennies and the mine needed bodies small enough to fit in spaces adults couldn't reach. That was before the 1842 Mines Act banned women and children under 10 from underground work, back when the moral calculation was even more skewed toward profit than it is now. Of course, banned is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. The law says no children under 10, but enforcement requires inspectors, and inspectors require funding, and funding requires Parliament to care about Welsh mining villages, which is asking quite a lot. So you've got this boy, who is definitely not 10 years old, sitting in the dark because his father swore to the overman that, yes, absolutely, the lad just turned 10 last month, looks young for his age is all. The mainstream historical fact that everyone learns is that the 1842 Mines Act was a great humanitarian reform that ended child labour in British mines. The reality, as you're witnessing right now, is that laws passed in London and enforcement in a Welsh valley are two very different things. The mine owners pay lip service to the regulations while finding creative ways around them, and the families are desperate enough to participate in the fiction. You pass other child workers as you navigate the tunnels. There's a hurrier, a boy maybe 12, pushing a coal dram that weighs probably 3 times what he does, bent nearly double in a tunnel too low for an adult. The harness around his waist and between his legs was supposedly banned by the same act that banned young children, but apparently nobody told the mine managers. Or they told them, and the managers calculated that the fine for breaking the law was less than the cost of installing proper haulage systems. There's something particularly grotesque about watching a child's childhood being stolen in real time, hour by hour, shift by shift. That boy pushing the dram should be in school, or playing, or doing literally anything except destroying his spine and lungs in service of extracting coal to heat London parlours. But his family needs his wages, maybe 3p a day, a quarter of what you earn. And the mine needs his small body, and so here we are, perpetuating a system that everyone agrees is terrible, but nobody with power seems interested in actually stopping. Historians still argue whether the reforms of the 1840s actually reduced child labour in mines, or just drove it underground. Metaphorically speaking, since it was already literally underground. Some evidence suggests that enforcement was so lax that child employment actually increased in some regions after the laws passed, because mine owners knew inspectors rarely visited, and families knew they could claim ignorance. You started in the pit at 7, which makes you maybe 35 now, though you're not entirely certain of your exact age. Birth records weren't really a thing for working families when you were born, and your mother wasn't great with dates. You spent 3 years as a trapper, sitting in the dark for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, developing an intimate familiarity with absolute blackness and the particular quality of silence that exists underground. The isolation was the worst part. Not the darkness. You got used to that. Not even the fear, though there was plenty of that every time you heard rocks falling or timbers creaking. It was the crushing loneliness of being 7 years old and utterly alone in the dark for hours at a stretch. Sometimes other boys would visit during their rounds, trade a few words, move on. Sometimes you wouldn't hear another human voice for your entire shift except the cursing of the dram operators as you fumbled with the door latch. There's a quirky psychological phenomenon that's been documented in former child trappers. Many of them report being unable to tolerate complete silence as adults. They need some background noise, some evidence of human presence, or the old panic resurfaces. You've noticed it in yourself. You sleep better when Catherine is snoring softly beside you. Worse when the house is too quiet. The chapel organist, who started as a trapper at 6 and worked it for 5 years, apparently can't eat a meal without conversation happening around him. At 10, you graduated to hurrier, which was promoted as a better job but was really just trading psychological torture for physical torture. Now, instead of sitting still in darkness, you were hauling loaded coal drams through tunnels barely high enough to crawl through. The harness cutting into your waist and between your legs. Your hands and knees raw from scrambling over sharp rocks and through puddles of water and worse things. The harness system was designed by people who had clearly never worn one. A leather strap around your waist, a chain running between your legs connecting to the dram. You moved like a beast of burden, because that's what you were, pulling loads of coal that often weighed several £100 through spaces where you couldn't stand upright. The damage to developing spines was catastrophic, which is why half the older miners in this village are permanently hunched even when standing in spaces, tall enough to accommodate them. You did that until 14, when you were finally big enough to work as a collier proper, swinging a pick at the coalface like a real miner. This was presented as a promotion, a coming of age, a sign of respect. Looking back, it was just the next phase of exploitation. You'd been physically toughened by 6 years of underground work, your body adapted to the environment, your lungs already compromised enough that you didn't notice the dust anymore. The boy trapper watches you pass with huge eyes that reflect your lamplight. You want to tell him something encouraging, something about how it gets better, how he'll survive this and grow up and have a life. But you can't lie to him. He's sitting in darkness in a hole in the ground at age 8, and nothing about his future trajectory suggests improvement. So you just nod, and he nods back, and you move on. By Thursday morning, your body has achieved a kind of grudging acceptance of its fate. The back pain hasn't lessened exactly, but it's been joined by shoulder pain, knee pain, and a general full-body ache that creates a democratic distribution of misery. You're halfway through the week, which means you're halfway to Saturday payday, which means you're halfway to having money you'll immediately owe to someone else. The mathematics of optimism in a mining village require creative accounting. But Thursday also means something else. It's the day Catherine will join the other women at Mrs. Williams' cottage for the weekly mending circle. This isn't just sewing, though there's plenty of that given how fast pick clothes disintegrate. It's the village information exchange, the mutual aid society, and the informal welfare system all rolled into one gathering of women with needles and strong opinions. You know this because when you stumbled home Wednesday evening, Catherine was already coordinating. Mary will mind the Williams baby tomorrow, she told you while serving dinner. In exchange, Mrs. Williams is giving us her old kettle. The handle's loose, but you can fix it. And I'm taking our extra eggs to Mrs. Jones because her Dewey got his arm crushed on Tuesday, and they'll need help till he's healed. This is how the village survives, not through official channels or government assistance, those barely exist for people like you, but through an intricate web of mutual obligation that ensures nobody falls too far too fast. You borrow a cup of sugar today, you return it tomorrow, plus a bit extra. Your wife helps birth a neighbour's baby, that neighbour's oldest daughter helps mind your children next week. Someone's husband gets injured, the whole street contributes pennies toward medical care and food, until he's back on his feet. The mainstream historical fact is that working-class Victorian communities relied on mutual aid societies and friendly societies for support. What's less discussed is how much of that support was organised by women through informal networks that never showed up in official records or membership rolls. The men had their lodge meetings and their union talk, but the women had something more effective: daily contact, shared labour, and an information network that could disseminate news faster than any telegraph. Down in the pit, you're working alongside men whose families are woven into this same network. Daffyd's wife and Catherine share child-minding duties weekly. The man working the next seam over is married to Catherine's cousin. The boy hurrying drams past your section is the nephew of the woman who helped deliver your youngest. Everyone is connected to everyone through blood or marriage or mutual necessity. "Did you hear about the collection?" Daffyd asks during the midday break, gnawing on his bread. "For the Davies boy with the crushed leg." You shake your head. News travels fast in the tunnels, but you haven't heard this particular piece yet. Chapel's organising it, asking for a penny from every working man, twopence if you can spare it. They reckon they can raise maybe £2 to help the family while he's recovering. £2, it's a fortune and it's nothing. Enough to keep a family fed for a month maybe, but nowhere near enough to replace the lifetime of lost wages from a 16-year-old who'll never work again. Still, it's what the community can manage, so it's what gets managed. There's a quirky tradition in Welsh mining villages called penny readings, community gatherings where someone reads aloud from newspapers or books, while everyone contributes a penny for the privilege of attending. The pennies go into a fund for injured miners or bereaved families. It's entertainment and mutual insurance combined, and it's entirely organised outside official channels, because official channels don't give a damn about Welsh miners. You'll contribute to the Davies collection, of course, not because you're particularly charitable. Charity implies choice, and this isn't that. It's insurance. Today the Davies boy gets crushed. Tomorrow it could be you, and when it is you, you'll need the community to step up the same way. It's not altruism, it's survival mathematics. "The union's been talking again," Daffyd mentions quietly, glancing around even though you're alone in this section. The union is technically legal now. The Trade Union Act of 1871 just passed, but mine owners don't distinguish between technically legal and practically tolerated. Men suspected of union organising find themselves assigned to the most dangerous faces or laid off for unrelated reasons. Talking about what, you ask, though you can guess. Wages, safety, the usual. He lowers his voice further. Meeting Saturday night, after chapel, behind Griffith's barn. This is how organising happens. Whispered conversations in the dark, careful networks of trusted men, meetings hidden from management eyes. The mine owners have spies everywhere. Desperate men who'll report union talk in exchange for better, shifts, or debt forgiveness. So you trust only people who've proven trustworthy through years of shared danger. The fierce loyalty miners feel toward each other is born from necessity, but runs deeper than calculation. You've shared darkness with these men, trusted them to shore up roofs and warn about gas and pull you out when rocks fall. You've seen them at their worst, scared, injured, crying for their mothers in the moments before death. And they've seen you the same way. That creates bonds that outside money can't break. Last year, the company tried to bring in English workers to replace some Welsh miners they considered troublesome. The entire village united in making those replacement workers so unwelcome that they left within a week. Nothing violent. That would give the owners an excuse to bring in magistrates. Just a comprehensive social freezing out. No shopkeeper would serve them. No landlady would rent to them. No one would speak to them except in curt, hostile Welsh. They broke and fled, and the company learned that replacing miners wasn't as simple as hiring new bodies. Historians still argue whether this kind of community solidarity actually improved working conditions or just made mine owners more creative in their exploitation. From where you're sitting, solidarity might not win battles, but it keeps you sane. Knowing that Dafydd will check on Catherine if you die underground, knowing that the community will collect pennies for your children, knowing that you're not completely alone in this industrial nightmare, that's worth something that doesn't show up in wage calculations. Above ground, your children are being minded by neighbours while Catherine works. Your dinner tonight will include vegetables from a neighbour's garden, traded for Catherine's bread. Your tools were sharpened by the village smith who charges less than the company rate because his cousin married your uncle. Your wife's shoes were resoled by a cobbler who owed your family a favour from 2 years ago. None of this is written down. None of this would appear in an economic analysis of mining village life, but it's the infrastructure that keeps everyone alive. Thursday evening means chapel choir practice, which means you gulp down your dinner faster than is probably healthy, splash water on your face to remove the worst of the coal dust, and change into your Sunday clothes even though it's not Sunday. Chapel demands standards, and showing up to choir practice in pit clothes would be a social catastrophe, roughly equivalent to cursing during the sermon. Capel Bethel sits at the top of the village like a stone sentinel, brick-built and stern, with windows that glare down at the terraced cottages below. It's the largest building in the valley besides the mine works, which tells you everything about the two institutions that govern your life. The company owns your body 6 days a week. The chapel claims your soul on the 7th and makes aggressive bids for your evenings as well. You're not late, but you're not early either, which puts you in the uncomfortable middle ground where the minister might notice but probably won't comment. Reverend Evans is already in the chapel hall, organising sheet music with the kind of precision he probably applies to organising souls for the afterlife. He's a small man, barely 5.5 feet, but he carries himself with the authority of someone who has a direct line to God and isn't afraid to use it. "Ah, brother," he says, which is how he addresses all the men regardless of whether you're actually related. "Good of you to join us. I trust the pit was kind today?" "Kind enough," you say, which is the expected response. You don't mention the cracked roof or the rising water or the 8-year-old trapper sitting in darkness. Chapel is for spiritual concerns, not earthly complaints, or at least that's the official line. The reality is more complicated. The chapel hall is filling with men and women, separate sides naturally, because God apparently cares deeply about gender segregation during hymn practice. The men cluster on the left, still smelling faintly of coal and soap. The women on the right smelling of cooking fires and laundry starch. Catherine is already there, sitting with the altos, her worn hymnal open on her lap. Welsh chapel culture is difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. It's not just religion, it's social structure, entertainment, education, and rigid hierarchy all wrapped in theological justification. Your standing in the community is directly correlated to your standing in chapel. Miss too many services and people start talking, arrive late and eyebrows raise, fail to contribute to the collection, and your family's moral fibre becomes suspect. The choir itself is serious business. This isn't casual singing. This is Welsh choral tradition that stretches back centuries, that survived English attempts to suppress the language, that represents cultural identity as much as religious devotion. The four-part harmony, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, is executed with the kind of precision that coal mining definitely doesn't inspire. Down in the pit, precision gets you marginally better coal tonnage. In chapel choir, precision gets you closer to God and higher social status. Reverend Evans raises his hands for attention, and the murmuring stops instantly. "We'll begin with Cameronda," he announces, and there's a collective settling as everyone finds the page. "And I want to hear those tenors. You were weak last week." The criticism is delivered in Welsh. Chapel business is always in Welsh, even though the minister can speak perfectly good English when he's dealing with mine management or English authorities. The language choice is deliberate. Welsh for God and community, English for commerce and oppression. Historians still argue whether this linguistic separation helped preserve Welsh culture or created unhelpful divisions, but standing here about to sing in the language of your childhood, you know which side of that debate you fall on. The opening notes of Cameronda fill the hall, and something shifts in the atmosphere. This is a hymn written by a Welsh minister for Welsh congregations, set to a tune that practically demands emotional investment. "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land." The irony of singing about barren lands while living in a valley carved hollow by coal mining isn't lost on anyone, but somehow that makes it more powerful, not less. The harmonies build, the women's voices climbing above the men's, the bass line rumbling underneath like underground machinery, and for a few minutes you're not a coal-stained miner with a damaged spine and crushing debt. You're part of something larger, something beautiful, something that transcends the daily grind of survival. There's a quirky phenomenon that musicologists have documented in Welsh mining villages. The incidence of perfect pitch and exceptional harmonic sense is significantly higher than in comparable English communities. The theory is that generations of choral singing created a kind of cultural selection pressure for musical ability. Whether that's true or just romantic speculation, you've definitely noticed that even the worst singer in this choir would be considered decent in most English churches. The minister stops you halfway through the second verse. No, no, no. The altos are rushing. Feel the rhythm, don't just count it. He demonstrates by conducting with exaggerated slowness, and the altos, Catherine among them, look appropriately chastened. This is the minister's power. He can criticize your singing in a way that feels like criticizing your soul, and you'll accept it, because he represents God and respectability and everything the community values. Missing choir practice isn't technically a sin, but it might as well be. The gossip network that operates through the women's mending circles and the men's shift changes will note your absence and speculate about the reasons. Sick, acceptable, if temporary. Working late, suspicious. Are you really working or are you at the pub? Just didn't feel like it. Moral decline, obviously, and your family will hear about it through increasingly pointed comments and meaningful looks. The minister's approval conversely opens doors. Need a character reference for a new job? The minister's word carries weight. Want your daughter to marry well? The minister's recommendation of your family's piety helps, trying to access charity funds. The minister decides who's deserving. He's unelected, unanswerable to anyone except his God and the chapel trustees who appointed him, and he wields social power that the mine manager would envy. Better, Reverend Evans says after you've run through Cameronda twice more. Now, bread of heaven, and I want passion, not just accuracy. We're praising God, not filing reports. Friday arrives with the same darkness and the same cold floor and the same aching body, but there's a subtle shift in the atmosphere both at home and in the pit. Tomorrow is Saturday. Tomorrow is payday. Tomorrow you'll stand in line at the colliery office and receive the tangible evidence that this week of suffering has translated into coins. Fewer coins than you deserve, certainly, but coins nonetheless. This anticipation does nothing to make Friday's shift easier. If anything, you're more exhausted than you were Monday because you've now accumulated 5 consecutive days of physical destruction. Your hands, despite their calluses, have developed new blisters that sit atop old blisters in layers like geological strata. Your back has moved past specific pain points and settled into a general complaint that encompasses your entire spine from neck to tailbone. And there's a persistent cough that's been developing all week, a deep rattling thing that brings up black phlegm every morning. The black spit is so universal among miners that nobody even comments on it anymore. You wake up, you cough, you spit something that looks like coal slurry into the chamber pot, and you get on with your day. The mainstream historical fact that everyone learns is that coal miners developed pneumoconiosis, black lung disease, from breathing coal dust. What's less discussed is how slowly and insidiously it develops, how you don't notice the gradual decrease in lung capacity because it's spread across years and decades, how by the time you realise you're dying it's far too late to do anything about it. But that's a tomorrow problem, or more accurately, a 10 years from now problem. Today's problem is getting through another shift without being crushed, drowned, blown up or suffocated. Down in the pit there's a different energy among the men. Still exhausted, still moving through the motions of hewing coal, but with an edge of Friday anticipation that makes the conversations during breaks slightly more animated. People are calculating their expected wages, debating how to allocate them, making plans that will inevitably be disappointed by the reality of company deductions. "I reckon I've filled 23 drams this week," Dafydd says during the midday break, his bread forgotten in his hand as he works through the mathematics. "At 1 6 per tonne, half a tonne per drame, that's what, 17 shillings? You've been doing your own calculations. You're forgetting the small coal deduction. Damn!" His face falls. "Right, so maybe 15 shillings then? Before lamp rental, tool charges and the mysterious processing fees that nobody can explain," you add helpfully. "So probably closer to 12. This is the game every miner plays on Friday. Calculate your theoretical earnings, then systematically deduct all the ways the company will reduce that number until you arrive at something approaching reality. It's like that children's game where you count down from 10, except instead of fingers you're counting down shillings, and instead of fun it's economic depression. The company has refined wage theft into an art form. You're paid by the ton of coal you produce, which sounds fair until you realise that A, the company controls the scales and can claim your coal weighs less than it does. B, any coal that's too small gets deducted from your tonnage even though the company still sells it. C, any rock mixed in with your coal results in a fine that's larger than the cost of sorting it out would be. And D, you're charged for the tools, materials and infrastructure required to produce coal in the first place. It's genius, really, in a deeply evil way. They've created a system where you can work yourself to exhaustion and still barely break even. There's a quirky accounting practice that some miners follow, keeping a personal ledger at home where they track their tonnage independently of the company's records. These ledgers often show discrepancies between what the miner knows they produced and what the company claims they produced, with the company's numbers mysteriously always being lower. Not lower enough to justify confrontation, that would risk your job, but consistently lower enough to shave profits in the company's favour. Historians still argue whether this systematic undercounting was intentional fraud or just the inevitable result of imprecise measurement systems, which is the kind of generous interpretation that dead miners probably don't appreciate. But despite the inevitable disappointment waiting in tomorrow's pay packet, there's still that spark of Friday hope. You've survived another week. You'll have money, however little, to bring home to Catherine. The children will see their father hand over coins. Tangible proof that all this absence and exhaustion serves a purpose. It's not much, but it's something. "What are you spending yours on?" Dafydd asks, finishing his bread and starting on a wrinkled apple that's seen better days. "Debt at the Tommy shop, probably," you say. "We're down about 7 shillings, and Gwilym needs new stockings. His toes are making a break for freedom." Ambitious toes. Very ambitious, revolutionary even. The joke is weak, but it's Friday, so weak jokes are permitted. Besides, there's only so much humour you can extract from child poverty and crushing debt. You're doing your best here. Above ground, Catherine is undoubtedly doing her own calculations. She knows approximately what you'll earn, knows exactly what's owed at various shops and neighbours, knows which bills can be delayed and which need immediate payment. The domestic economy she manages is more complex than anything the mine's accountants deal with, but she does it without a ledger or formal training, just years of practice in making not enough stretch to almost adequate. Saturday morning you're awake even earlier than usual, not because of the knocker-upper, but because anticipation has done what exhaustion couldn't, interrupted your sleep. Today is payday, which means today you collect the physical manifestation of this week's suffering. The ritual is always the same. Finish your shift, queue at the pay office, receive less than you expected, go home and hand most of it to Catherine. Try not to think too hard about the mathematics of poverty. The shift itself feels longer when you know pay is waiting at the end. It's like how the last mile of a journey always seems to take forever. Except this last mile involves swinging a pick at coal while your body reminds you that you've been doing this for 5 consecutive days, and perhaps it's time to stop. Your muscles have opinions about continued labour, and those opinions are negative. But you push through because the alternative is not getting paid, and not getting paid means your family doesn't eat, and your family not eating is simply not an option. So you swing the pick, you fill the drams, you breathe the dust, and you count down the hours until the bell rings. When it finally does, that blessed 5-bell signal that means end of shift, you're up and moving faster than you have all week. The walk back to the shaft is a river of men all driven by the same urgency. Payday brings out a particular energy, a collective anticipation that makes even the most exhausted miner move with something approaching enthusiasm. The queue at the colliery office is already forming by the time you reach the surface. The office itself is a brick building adjacent to the pithead works, notably better maintained than any structure the workers occupy. The windows are actual glass rather than oiled paper. The roof is slate rather than rusted corrugated iron. And there's even a small flower bed out front that someone tends with care that seems almost offensive given the industrial wasteland surrounding it. You take your place in line behind maybe 40 other men, all of us blackened with coal dust, all of us clutching our tally sticks that prove we worked this week. The line moves with bureaucratic slowness because the clerk, a man named Price who parts his hair exactly in the middle and probably considers it a significant achievement, insists on checking every single tally against his ledger, making calculations with theatrical precision and counting out coins like he's personally funding your wages from his own pocket. The man in front of you finally reaches the window. Name? Price asks, even though he definitely knows everyone's name after years of doing this exact job. Morgan. Thomas Morgan. Price makes a show of running his finger down the ledger. Ah yes, Morgan. 21 drams recorded. That's 10.5 tons at 1 shilling 6 per tonne. 15 shillings 9 total. You can see Morgan's face light up. 15 shillings is a good week, but Price isn't finished. Now then, deductions. He produces a separate sheet. Lamp rental 6 days at 3p per day, 1 and 6. Tool rental 8p. Cottage rent for the week 3 shillings. Powder charges for blasting 1 shilling. Tommy shop debt servicing 2 shillings 4p. Small coal deduction 1 shilling 3p. Processing fees 6p. And he pauses dramatically. A fine of 1 shilling for reported insubordination to the overman on Wednesday. Morgan's face has progressively fallen with each deduction. Insubordination? The overman's report is quite clear. You disputed your work assignment. Price says this with the finality of someone reading from Holy Scripture. I asked a question about, questions can constitute insubordination, Morgan. Would you like me to note your continued argumentative behaviour? Morgan's jaw clenches, but he shakes his head. Arguing means more fines, maybe being marked as a troublemaker, potentially losing future shifts. The power imbalance is so complete that resistance is futile. Price makes a final calculation. That leaves you with 4 shillings and 10p. He counts out the coins with exaggerated care and slides them across the counter. Morgan takes them without a word and walks away, shoulders slumped. 4 shillings 10p, out of an original 15 shillings 9p. The company just took over 70% of his wages through a combination of legitimate charges, questionable fees, and outright fabricated fines. And there's nothing he can do about it because the mine owns the cottages, owns the tools, owns the shops, and writes the rules. You're next. Name? Davies. Evan Davies. You hand over your tally sticks. The same ritual unfolds. Price consults his ledger, makes calculations, announces your gross tonnage, 20 drams, so 10 tons, 15 shillings total. Then the deductions begin their terrible march through your earnings. Lamp rental 1 and 6, tool charges 9p, cottage rent 3 shillings, powder 10p, Tommy shop debt 1 shilling 4p. You made a payment last week, the debt is shrinking slowly. Small coal deduction 1 shilling, processing fees 6p. You brace for a fine, they're random and inevitable, but apparently this week you've escaped the clerk's attention. Small mercies. Total deductions 8 shillings 11p, leaving you with 6 shillings and a penny. He counts out 6 shillings and 1 penny, slides them across. Next. 6 shillings and 1 penny. You've worked 6 days, 60 hours, swung a pick thousands of times, breathed coal dust until your lungs are probably more coal than lung, and you're walking away with 6 shillings. A skilled tradesman in London earns that in a day. A middle-class clerk earns more in an afternoon. But you're just a Welsh coal miner, so 6 shillings is what you get. The mainstream historical fact is that Victorian workers were poorly paid. But statistics don't capture the visceral unfairness of having your wages systematically stolen through invented fees and charges. Historians still argue whether the truck system and company housing were more exploitative than simple low wages, but standing here with 6 shillings that used to be 15, you're pretty sure they're all just different flavours of the same theft. You pocket the coins, they're heavy, real, the only tangible evidence that this week happened, and step away from the window. Outside, men cluster in small groups, comparing wages, commiserating over deductions, calculating how to divide their remaining shillings among competing debts and necessities. There's a quirky tradition some miners follow. They walk home the long way on payday, taking the route that doesn't pass any public houses, because the temptation to spend wages on beer is strong when you're exhausted and demoralised, and the pub offers temporary escape from both. You take the long way. The coins in your pocket feel heavier than their actual weight should allow. 6 shillings and 1 penny, reduced from 15 through the alchemy of company deductions, now pressing against your leg with every step. Each coin represents roughly 10 hours of labour, which means you're carrying about 60 hours of your life in metal form. It's a depressing way to think about currency, but accuracy doesn't care about your feelings. The route home, the long route, the one that bypasses the Prince of Wales public house, takes you past rows of cottages where other miners are making the same journey. Some are heading straight home like you, clutching their meagre wages with grim determination. Others are drifting in the opposite direction, toward the warm lights and welcoming sounds of the pub, where Saturday evening promises temporary amnesia and companionship, lubricated by beer. The pub isn't inherently evil, despite what Reverend Evans would have you believe. It's warm when your cottage is cold. It's social when underground work is isolating. It's a place where men can complain about the mine without worrying about company spies, where you can sing songs that aren't hymns, where the rigid hierarchy of pit and chapel relaxes slightly into something more egalitarian. For the price of a pint, 6pence, which is 1/12 of your weekly wages, you can sit by a fire and pretend you're not a piece of industrial machinery temporarily parked between shifts. But that's the problem, isn't it? 6pence for 1 pint. A shilling for 2. Half your wages could disappear in an evening of drinking, and while you'd have a pleasant Saturday night, your family would have a very unpleasant rest of the week. The mathematics are simple and brutal. Beer or bread, companionship or children's shoes, temporary warmth or permanent shelter. You can hear the pub from here, the rumble of male voices, occasional laughter, the distinct sound of a tin whistle playing something that definitely isn't a chapel-approved melody. It's tempting. God, it's tempting. Your body aches, your spirit is battered from another week, underground, and the promise of a few hours where none of that matters is genuinely appealing. The mainstream historical fact is that alcoholism was a significant problem in Victorian working-class communities, particularly in industrial areas. What's less discussed is how that alcoholism was a rational response to irrational circumstances. When your life is brutal, dangerous, and offers no realistic prospect of improvement, temporary chemical escape starts looking like reasonable self-medication rather than moral failure. The temperance movement, very strong in Welsh chapels naturally, preaches that alcohol is the root of poverty, that working men drink away their wages and create their own misery. This conveniently ignores the fact that the misery exists first and the drinking is a response to it, not the cause of it. But blaming workers for their moral failings is much easier than addressing the economic system that grinds them down, so temperance it is. There's a quirky tradition in some mining families where the wife meets her husband at the pay office and takes the wages directly, preventing any pub detours. You've seen it happen. Women waiting by the colliery gates, hands outstretched for coins that never touch their husbands' pockets. It's presented as wives not trusting their husbands, but really it's a practical acknowledgement that temptation is real, and hunger is too important to risk on willpower. Catherine doesn't meet you at the pay office, which means she trusts you to make the walk home with wages intact. Or possibly it means she's too busy managing the household to spare the time for wage collection duties. Either way, you're grateful for the implied trust even as you pass the pub and hear someone inside start singing Men of Harlech with more enthusiasm than accuracy. You're not a saint. You've been to the pub, spent money you couldn't afford on beer you didn't need. There was that Saturday last year when everything felt too heavy. The debt, the danger, the grinding sameness of wake, dig, sleep, repeat. And you walked past your cottage straight to the Prince of Wales and didn't come home until midnight with 3 shillings gone and nothing to show for it except a headache and Catherine's cold fury. She didn't yell. That would have been easier. She just looked at you with profound disappointment and said, "The children needed shoes." And she was right. The children did need shoes. Your temporary escape cost them literal foot protection. The guilt from that night has probably prevented more pub visits than all of Reverend Evans' temperance sermons combined. The men who do go to the pub tonight, and plenty will, aren't monsters. They're exhausted humans seeking comfort in the only form readily available to them. Some have wives who understand and budget for a Saturday pint. Some have no wives or children and can spend their wages however they choose. Some are so deep in debt that another shilling either way won't make a difference, so why not? Some are so trapped in addiction that choice isn't really a factor anymore. The chapel's response to all this is predictably judgmental. Temperance pledges, public shaming, sermons about the evils of drink that somehow always manage to imply that poverty is a moral failing rather than an economic condition. Reverend Evans can preach about the dignity of sober living because his wages aren't being stolen by company deductions, and he doesn't spend 10 hours a day in darkness wondering if today's the day the roof falls. Historians still argue whether the temperance movement in Wales actually reduced problem drinking, or just drove it underground and added shame to alcoholism's existing burdens. From your perspective, walking past the pub with wages in pocket and hunger waiting at home, the whole debate feels theoretical. The real question isn't whether drinking is morally good or bad, it's whether you can afford it, and the answer is no. You turn up the hill toward your cottage, putting distance between yourself and the pub's warm lights. Catherine will be waiting. The children will be waiting. The debt will be waiting. The Tommy shop will need payment. Gwilym still needs those stockings. The vegetable patch needs seeds for next season. Mary's dress has holes that need patching with fabric you can't quite afford yet. 6 shillings and 1 penny. It needs to cover all of that and more. The pub can wait. The pub can always wait. Your family can't. Behind you, the singing continues. Someone started Ahidi Knows Now, the Welsh lullaby that everybody knows, and the voices blend in decent harmony even through the beer haze. It's beautiful, honestly, that mixture of male voices and Welsh words and simple melody. For a moment you stop walking and just listen. Then you continue home. Sunday arrives without the knocker-upper's tap, which is simultaneously a blessing and unsettling. Your body, trained by 6 days of pre-dawn waking, struggles with the concept of sleeping past 5 in the morning. You lie in bed listening to Catherine's breathing, the children's small snores, and the village slowly waking to its 1 day of supposed rest. Supposed, because Sunday in a Welsh mining village isn't restful so much as differently exhausting. The slate floor is still cold when you finally rise, but there's no rushing today. No pit clothes to pull on, no snap tin to pack, no trudge downhill toward darkness. Instead, you wash more thoroughly than usual. Face, hands, neck, behind the ears like your mother insisted when you were small, and dress in your Sunday suit. It's your only suit, carefully preserved from your wedding 10 years ago, let out slightly to accommodate the thickness that manual labour builds in shoulders and chest, brushed weekly to fight the perpetual coal dust that infiltrates everything. Catherine is already organising the children like a sergeant drilling troops. Marie, help your sister with her hair. Gwilym, those are not your chapel stockings, get the good ones. Nest, if I have to tell you again about that hem. The domestic chaos has a familiar rhythm, an orchestration of limited resources trying to present respectability to a congregation that will judge any failure mercilessly. The walk to chapel is uphill, naturally, because everything in this village seems designed to require maximum effort. But today you're not alone. The entire village is moving in the same direction, a slow stream of families in their carefully maintained Sunday best, heading toward Capel Bethel like iron filings drawn to a magnet. The men wear dark suits and bowler hats. The women wear their best dresses, which means their least patched dresses, and bonnets that hide hair still carrying traces of cooking smoke and wash-day steam. Everyone nods to everyone else with a calibrated formality that would make diplomats envious. Too friendly and you're presumptuous. not friendly enough, and you're standoffish. The exact degree of hat-tipping and verbal greeting is determined by complex social hierarchies that nobody ever explicitly explains, but everyone somehow knows. The chapel bell is ringing, not the rapid clang of emergency, but the measured, sonorous tolling that summons the righteous. You can see Reverend Evans standing at the chapel door like St. Peter at the gates, greeting arrivals with a kind of scrutiny that assesses both your promptness and your spiritual state. Arrive too early, and you're showing off your piety. Arrive too late, and you're demonstrating moral laxity. The acceptable window is approximately 7 minutes before service starts, which requires surprisingly precise timing. Inside, the chapel is severe and beautiful in the way that only Welsh nonconformist architecture can achieve. No Catholic ornamentation here, no Anglican fussiness. Just whitewashed walls, dark wood pews arranged in strict rows, and a pulpit elevated high enough that Reverend Evans can literally look down upon his congregation, both physically and spiritually. The windows are clear glass rather than stained, because decorative glass is apparently too Catholic, too frivolous, too focused on beauty rather than truth. The pews themselves are socially encoded. The front rows are for the chapel trustees, the deacons, the families of unimpeachable respectability who've never missed a service or payment. The middle rows are for solid working families like yours, respectable enough, employed enough, pious enough. The back rows are for the suspect. Families with debt problems, men who smell like Saturday night's beer, wives whose husbands have been injured and can't work, anyone whose respectability is conditional or questioned. There's a quirky practice in some Welsh chapels of actually auctioning pew rights. Families pay annual fees for the privilege of sitting in specific pews, with better locations commanding higher prices. Capel Bethel doesn't go quite that far, but the social pressure to sit in your appropriate location is strong enough that you might as well be paying rent. You've sat in the same pew, third row from the back, left side, for a decade now, and moving would require either a dramatic improvement in your social standing or equally dramatic fall from grace. Catherine settles the children with the efficiency of long practice. Youngest in the middle where he can be watched, girls on the outside where their fidgeting is less disruptive. You're on the aisle, positioned to make a quick exit if Gwilym's behaviour requires emergency extraction. This has happened. It will happen again. 6-year-old boys and 2-hour chapel services are fundamentally incompatible, but theology doesn't care about child development. The service begins with a hymn, naturally. Welsh chapels run on hymns the way mines run on coal. The organ, played by Mrs. Jenkins with a kind of aggressive competence that suggests she's angry at the instrument, launches into the introduction, and 300 voices rise in unison. Calon Lean, Pure Heart, the hymn that every Welsh person knows from birth and will sing on their deathbed. The sound is genuinely overwhelming. This is what Welsh choral tradition sounds like when unleashed in enclosed space. 4-part harmony executed with precision, passion, and generations of practice. The men's voices provide the foundation, rumbling bass that you can feel in your chest. The women soar above, soprano lines that seem to reach toward heaven with desperate urgency. And everyone knows not just the melody but their proper part, because you've been singing these hymns since before you could read the words. The mainstream historical fact is that Welsh nonconformist chapels were central to Welsh cultural identity in the 19th century, preserving language and tradition. What statistics don't capture is the raw emotional power of 300 miners and their families singing about pure hearts and divine grace, while living in conditions that offer neither purity nor grace. There's something almost defiant about it. The world gives us coal dust and debt, but we have these moments of transcendent beauty. Reverend Evans ascends the pulpit as the final notes fade. He's a small man, but the elevated pulpit gives him physical authority, and his rhetorical skills provide the rest. He surveys the congregation with the expression of someone cataloguing sins, and you can almost see him mentally noting who's missing, who arrived late, who's wearing clothes that seem too fine for their supposed income. The sermon begins with a text from Proverbs, something about the virtuous woman who rises while it is yet night, and provides food for her household. Reverend Evans has opinions about this text, many opinions delivered in Welsh that alternates between honeyed persuasion and thunderous condemnation, depending on whether he's describing ideal behaviour or cataloguing your failures to achieve it. The virtuous woman, he intones, does not waste her husband's wages on frivolity. She does not gossip with neighbours while her children run wild. She does not neglect her duties for her own comfort. Each sentence lands like an accusation, and you can feel the women in the congregation straightening their spines, calculating whether they've committed any of these particular sins this week. But the men aren't exempt from judgment. And the virtuous man, Evans continues, pivoting smoothly, provides for his family through honest labour. He does not drink away his wages. He does not complain about God's will in placing him in his station. He accepts his lot with Christian humility and faith that heavenly rewards await those who suffer righteously in this life. This is the theological bargain offered by the chapel. Suffer now, get rewarded later. Your poverty isn't a failure of economic systems or exploitation by mine owners. It's a test of faith, an opportunity to demonstrate Christian virtue, a chance to prove you deserve heaven by enduring hell on earth. It's convenient theology for people who benefit from your suffering, less convenient for you personally. The sermon continues for 45 minutes, covering virtue, sin, the special moral dangers of mining life, the importance of temperance, proper Sabbath observance, and a lengthy digression into why the Methodist chapel down the valley is theologically incorrect on several key points. You've heard variations of this sermon dozens of times. Everyone has. But you listen respectfully because not listening would be noted, discussed, and used as evidence of spiritual decline. Finally, the sermon concludes with a prayer that's nearly as long as the sermon itself. Then the collection plate circulates, and you drop in 3p from last night's wages. It's expected. Refusing would brand you as selfish or impious. But watching your pennies disappear into the plate while mentally calculating how much bread that could have bought creates a special kind of resentment that you're definitely not supposed to feel in chapel. The closing hymn is "Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah" again. Apparently the Reverend is really attached to this one. And then you're released into the daylight. The service has consumed 2 hours. The morning is gone, but you have approximately 4 hours of freedom before the evening service demands your presence again. The walk home is slower than the walk to chapel, less formal now that duty has been temporarily satisfied. Men cluster in small groups discussing the sermon or, more likely, carefully not discussing how the Reverend's theological positions on accepting your station conveniently align with mine owner interests. Women gather separately, comparing notes on children's behaviour and planning the afternoon meal logistics. At home, Catherine sets out a cold dinner. Sunday cooking is minimal because you're supposed to rest on the Sabbath, which in practice means you eat yesterday's leftovers. There's bread, cheese, some cold mutton from earlier in the week, pickled vegetables from last year's garden harvest. It's adequate, which is the highest praise poverty allows. After eating, you face the great question of Sunday afternoon. What to do with 4 hours of freedom that isn't actually free because you're exhausted from the week, confined by social expectations, and required back at chapel for evening service. Some men nap, collapsing into sleep with the desperation of people who've accumulated a week's worth of exhaustion. You're tempted, but Gwilym is bouncing with 6-year-old energy that doesn't recognise Sabbath rest, and someone needs to manage that before he destroys something. Take him outside, Catherine suggests, which isn't really a suggestion. Get him tired before evening service. So you take Gwilym and Mari and Nest, who attach themselves to the expedition, and walk up the hill behind the village. It's the first time all week you've moved upward instead of downward, toward sky instead of toward earth, and even exhausted, it feels symbolically important. The hills above the village are technically beautiful in that desolate Welsh way. Rough grass, scattered sheep, rocky outcroppings that haven't been industrialised yet. But you can't escape the mine even here. Look down, and you see the pit wheel turning even on Sunday because coal doesn't care about Sabbath rest. You see the slag heaps smoking. You see the terraced cottages arranged in grim rows. You see the chapel spire pointing accusingly at heaven like it's filing a complaint. There's a quirky phenomenon that botanists have documented in mining areas. Certain plants won't grow within a mile of active pits because the air quality and soil contamination are too severe. Up here, maybe half a mile from the valley floor, you're right at the boundary where life becomes possible again. Hardy grass clings to thin soil, gorse bushes manage scraggly yellow flowers, a few determined sheep nibble at vegetation that's probably more toxin than nutrition. Gwilym finds a stick and immediately begins a complicated game that involves hitting rocks, while making explosion sounds. Mari and Nest settle on an outcropping and pull out the small Bible they're supposed to be reading, though you suspect they're actually discussing which boys in chapel are least objectionable, which is probably theologically closer to sin than Bible study. You sit on a rock and just breathe. Air that's merely coal smoky rather than pure coal dust feels like luxury. Sunlight, even weak Welsh sunlight filtered through clouds, feels like something you'd forgotten existed. The view might be dominated by industrial blight, but there's sky too, and hills beyond the immediate valley, and evidence that the world extends beyond pit and cottage and chapel. Historians still argue whether Sunday Sabbath rest actually benefited workers or just ensured they were adequately recovered to work Monday. From up here, watching Willem destroy imaginary enemies with his stick while your daughters pretend to read scripture, you're not sure the academic distinction matters. These 4 hours aren't much, but they're something. A brief interruption in the cycle of extraction and exhaustion. The walk back down the hill reminds your body that rest is temporary and damage is permanent. Your knees protest the descent. They always do, ground down by years of kneeling on coal and rock. Your back tightens as gravity pulls you forward. And that cough, the one that's been developing all week, announces itself again with a deep rattle that brings up the familiar black phlegm. You spit into the grass rather than in front of the children, but Mari notices anyway. She's 13, old enough to understand what black spit means, old enough to have seen men cough themselves to death in their 40s. Her face does something complicated. Worry mixed with resignation mixed with the terrible acceptance that this is just how life works for mining families. Black lung. Pneumoconiosis, if you want the medical term, though most miners just call it the dust or miner's consumption. Or, with dark humour, the black spit badge of honour. It's what happens when you breathe coal dust for years, decades if you're unlucky enough to live that long. The particles embed themselves in lung tissue, creating nodules of scar tissue that gradually transform healthy pink lungs into black, stiff, useless sacs that can't process oxygen properly. The mainstream historical fact that everyone learns is that coal miners suffered from pneumoconiosis at alarming rates, with many dying in their 40s and 50s from respiratory failure. What's less discussed is how slowly and insidiously the disease develops, how you adapt to gradual breathlessness. Without realizing you're adapting, how just a cough becomes can't climb stairs without resting, becomes drowning in air across years that feel normal until you look back and realize they weren't. You're maybe 35, probably birth records being what they are, and you've been breathing coal dust professionally since age 7. That's 28 years of occupational lung destruction, and you're definitely noticing the effects. You can't walk up hills as easily as you could 5 years ago. You need to rest between swinging the pick more often. You wake up coughing every morning and go to sleep coughing every night. But these changes came on so gradually that you've normalized them, adjusted your expectations of what bodies can do. Back at the cottage, Catherine has that look she gets when she's trying to decide whether to voice concern or maintain the fiction that everything's manageable. She settles on fiction. Tea, she offers, which is her way of acknowledging the cough without discussing the cough. Please, you say, sinking into the chair that's worn to the exact shape of your body after a decade of use. The children scatter to their Sunday afternoon activities, which mostly involve being quiet enough to not disturb the Sabbath rest, while being active enough to not go insane from boredom. It's a narrow window. Your body is a catalogue of mining-related damage, an anatomical ledger of industrial extraction. Let's take inventory. Your back has chronic pain from years of working hunched in seams too low for human spines. The vertebrae have compressed unevenly, creating a permanent list to the left that's visible when you stand. Catherine has to take in your shirts on one side because your body's no longer symmetrical. Your hands are scarred from a dozen minor accidents, burns from hot metal, cuts from sharp coal edges. That time you nearly lost your thumb to a falling timber. The scars are white against coal-darkened skin, a geographical map of occupational hazards. Your hearing is damaged from years of pick strikes echoing in confined spaces, constant machinery noise, and that one time you were too close to a powder blast. You miss about 30% of quiet conversation now, which makes chapel services easier to tolerate but makes Catherine repeat herself frequently. Your knees are arthritic from kneeling on stone and coal. They ache in damp weather, which is most weather in Wales. They crack when you stand, a sound like breaking twigs that startles visitors and amuses the children. There's a quirky medical phenomenon that doctors have documented in coal miners called beat knee, chronic inflammation of the bursa from repeated kneeling on hard surfaces. It's so common that some medical texts use it as the textbook example of occupational injury. You have it in both knees. Congratulations. Your lungs, as discussed, are progressively turning into coal. But that's not the only respiratory issue. You also have chronic bronchitis from breathing sulfur dioxide from the slag heaps, occasional bouts of pneumonia that nearly kill you every few years, and a persistent wheeze that sounds like a distant train whistle. And then there are the injuries you don't have yet but probably will. The crushed limbs, the burned skin, the broken bones, the head trauma that mining life distributes with random cruelty. You've been lucky so far. No major accidents. Nothing that's prevented you from working. But luck in mining is a finite resource, and you're probably running low. The children aren't exempt from health impacts either. Gwilym has the chronic cough that all village children develop from breathing coal smoke from birth. Mari is showing signs of anemia, pale skin, constant tiredness, from a diet that's heavy on bread and light on everything else. Ness seems healthy for now, but Catherine worries about her constant headaches, wonders if they're from eye strain, from sewing in dim light, or something worse. Catherine herself carries the health burden of mining life in different ways. Her hands are raw from washing pit clothes in lye soap. Her back aches from hauling water and bending over the washboard. She has stress-related stomach problems that flare when money is tightest, and there's a heaviness she carries, not physical exactly, but tangible nonetheless, from managing impossible domestic economics while watching her husband slowly die of occupational disease. Historians still argue whether the health impacts of mining were worse in deep coal mines versus surface quarries, or whether duration of exposure mattered more than intensity. From inside your deteriorating body, these academic debates feel theoretical. What matters is that you're breaking down, your family is breaking down, and the systems that profit from this breakdown offer no compensation, no medical care, no acknowledgement of responsibility. The black lung grows in your chest with every shift, joining the catalogue of injuries, fevers, and the peculiar diseases that mark mining families. This section should cover the accumulation of health problems over the week and throughout a mining life. I've been covering that well. I should continue with this theme, perhaps covering the evening service and then tying it back to the cycle of the week. Word count needs to be exactly 1,000 words. Evening service approaches with the inevitability of Monday morning, and you dress again in your Sunday suit, which has now been worn for 4 hours and somehow already feels less fresh than it did this morning. The walk back to chapel is quieter than the morning procession, exhaustion having settled over the village like the ever-present coal smoke. Even the children drag their feet, Gwilym's earlier energy depleted by his hill-climbing adventures. The evening service is shorter than morning, 90 minutes instead of 2 hours, small mercies, but somehow feels longer because exhaustion has eroded whatever spiritual receptiveness you managed to summon this morning. Reverend Evans preaches about perseverance through suffering, which is his favourite theme, using Job as his example of righteous endurance through trials sent by God to test faith. The implicit message is clear. Your suffering is divinely ordained, your poverty is spiritually meaningful, your physical deterioration is an opportunity for moral growth. The mine owners certainly didn't create this theology, but they benefit enormously from it. Hard to organise unions or demand better conditions when the minister is telling you that suffering is God's plan and complaining demonstrates weak faith. There's a quirky theological tradition in some Welsh chapels called the experience meeting, where members stand and testify about how God has worked in their lives. Capel Bethel doesn't practice this regularly, but you've seen it at revival meetings, miners standing to praise God for sparing them from roof falls that killed their friends, widows thanking the Lord for the strength to raise 6 children on charity, men with black lung testifying that their suffering has brought them closer to Christ. It's psychologically complex, genuine faith, mixed with trauma response, mixed with community pressure to find meaning in meaninglessness. The closing hymn tonight is Abide With Me, that beautiful, mournful meditation on mortality that every Welsh funeral features. Swift to its close ebbs out life's little day, earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. The words hit differently when you're coughing black phlegm and calculating how many more years your lungs might hold out. Not many, probably. 45 if you're lucky. 50 would be miraculous. After the service, families drift homeward through darkness broken only by oil lamps in windows. The pit wheel has stopped turning. Even the mine rests on Sunday night, giving the machinery a break. It doesn't extend to the men who operate it. The silence is almost unsettling after 6 days of industrial noise. At home, Catherine organises the children for bed with efficient firmness. Tomorrow is Monday. Tomorrow the cycle begins again. The knocker-uppers tap, the cold floor, the descent into darkness. Your body knows this even as you try to pretend that Sunday night can last forever. Your cough is worse, Catherine says quietly. Once the children are settled and you're sitting by the dying fire with the tea she's reheated. You could deny it, but she's not stupid and you're not a good liar. Aye. Daffyd's father died at 42. Same cough. I'm not Daffyd's father. No, you're just every other miner in this valley. Her voice isn't angry, just tired. Tired of watching men die slowly. Tired of the calculations. How many more years of wages before you can't work? How will the family survive then? Which children will have to leave school to work? What happens when the breadwinner can't breadwin anymore? These aren't hypothetical questions. Every mining family faces them eventually. Some men get injured suddenly, crushed, burned, broken, and the crisis arrives all at once. Others, like you, deteriorate gradually through occupational disease, giving their families years to watch death approach with terrible slowness. The mainstream medical knowledge of the 1870s doesn't really recognise occupational lung disease as preventable. Doctors know that miners get sick, know that coal dust is involved somehow, but the connection between exposure and disease isn't fully understood or, more accurately, isn't acknowledged by industries that would be liable if they admitted causation. Modern occupational health standards, ventilation, dust suppression, protective equipment, exposure limits won't develop for another 50 years. You're living through the experimental phase where workers are the test subjects and longevity is the outcome measure. Maybe talk to the doctor, Catherine suggests, though neither of you can afford the doctor and both of you know it. And he'll say what? Stop breathing coal dust? Excellent advice, except the only way to stop breathing coal dust is to stop working, and stopping working means starving. There might be something. There isn't. You say this more harshly than intended, but it's true. There is no cure for pneumoconiosis. There is no treatment. There is only gradual suffocation and eventual death, with the timeline determined by how long your particular lungs can tolerate being transformed into coal. Catherine is quiet for a moment then. The children are watching. They see you coughing. They're not stupid. This is what breaks you a little bit. Not your own mortality. You've made peace with dying young, or at least you've achieved resignation, which is close enough. But your children watching you deteriorate, learning that this is what fathers do, that this is what work means, that this is the inheritance you're passing them. Black lungs and early graves and the terrible knowledge that their labour enriches others while destroying themselves. Gwilym wants to work in the pit when he's older. He's 6 and thinks it sounds exciting, adventurous, like the stories older boys tell to make themselves seem brave. You've tried to discourage this without explaining why, but how do you tell your 6-year-old son that his father's job is killing him, and will kill the son too if he follows the same path? The fire is dying. The candle is burning low. Tomorrow is Monday. Tomorrow is always Monday eventually. Sunday night slides into Monday morning with the smoothness of a cage descending a shaft. Inevitable, mechanical, and carrying you toward darkness whether you consent or not. You lie in bed listening to Catherine's breathing and counting the hours until the knocker-upper's tap arrives. 4 hours, 3 hours, 2. At some point you stop counting and just wait, suspended in that peculiar pre-dawn anxiety where you're too awake to sleep but too tired to think clearly. This is the cycle. This is the trap. This is the rest of your life until your body gives out or the mine claims you in some more dramatic fashion. The thing about industrial villages is that they're designed, quite deliberately, though no one admits it, to be inescapable. Every system, every structure, every economic mechanism is calibrated to keep you exactly where you are, working, producing, dying slowly, and raising children who will do the same. It's not accidental. It's architectural. Consider the geography. The village sits in a narrow valley, surrounded by hills that are either owned by the mine company or so marginal that farming them isn't viable. The only road out leads to the next valley over, which has its own pit, its own identical village, its own trapped population. To reach actual civilization, Cardiff maybe, or even just a market town with opportunities, requires a full day's walk or train fare you can't afford. Physical escape is theoretically possible but practically implausible. Consider the economics. You're paid in a combination of cash and company tokens. You rent your cottage from the company. You buy necessities from the company store, often on credit. You're in debt to the company for tools, materials, fines, and accumulated purchases. This isn't accidental bad luck. It's systematic debt bondage that ensures you can never save enough to leave. You're trapped by negative numbers in a ledger somewhere, trapped as effectively as if there were actual chains. Consider the social structure. Leaving the village means abandoning the community support networks that keep you alive, the mutual aid, the shared childcare, the collections for injured families, the informal insurance against catastrophe. It means losing your pew at chapel, your social standing, your identity within the only community you've ever known. And where would you go? To a city where you have no connections, no references, no skills except coal mining. The unknown is terrifying when the known is barely survivable. Historians still argue whether company towns and industrial villages represented a form of economic efficiency or deliberate social control. From inside the trap, the academic distinction seems pointless. The result is the same. You're here, you'll stay here, and your children will probably be here too, breathing the same coal dust and dying the same premature deaths. The mainstream historical fact is that social mobility was limited in Victorian Britain, particularly for working-class families in industrial regions. What's less discussed is how systematically that immobility was enforced through interconnected economic, social and physical barriers that made escape not just difficult, but nearly impossible, without extraordinary luck or circumstances. There are exactly 3 ways out of this village for people of your class, and none of them are good. Option 1. Join the army. The military will take you, feed you, pay you, and possibly get you killed in some colonial war that benefits people who've never held a pick. Some men take this option, trading coal mining for the adventure of dying in Afghanistan or South Africa instead of Wales. At least the army offers variety in your mortality. Option 2. Emigrate. America, Australia, Canada. These places theoretically offer opportunities for fresh starts. But emigration requires money you don't have, skills beyond coal mining, and the willingness to abandon everything familiar for a completely unknown future on the other side of the world. A few families try it every year. Some succeed. Many fail and return, or fail and can't afford to return, stranded in foreign poverty instead of familiar poverty. Option 3. Die. This is the most common escape route and the only one that's truly guaranteed. Everyone who enters the pit eventually leaves it, one way or another. Quickly through accident or slowly through disease, but always eventually. There's a quirky phenomenon that sociologists have documented in isolated industrial communities, a kind of psychological adaptation where people stop seeing their circumstances as temporary or changeable, and instead develop elaborate mental frameworks to make permanent entrapment bearable. You see it in how miners talk about the pit, not as a job they're doing temporarily until something better comes along, but as an identity, a calling, even a kind of pride. I'm a coal man isn't just describing employment, it's defining selfhood. This adaptation is psychologically necessary. You can't maintain hope for change that won't come without eventually breaking, but it's also how the system perpetuates itself. Once you've accepted that this is simply what you are rather than what you're temporarily doing, you stop looking for exits. You stop imagining alternatives. You start training your sons to follow you into the pit, because what else would they do? This is what coal men do. You've watched it happen to yourself over the years. At 15, you still thought you might escape somehow. Learn a trade, maybe. Save money and open a shop. Something. By 20, married with a baby, those dreams had faded to vague wishes. By 25, they were completely gone, replaced by the more immediate goals of survival and minimal adequacy. Now, at 35, you don't even remember what those alternative futures looked like. There's only this: the pit, the cottage, the chapel, the cycle. Monday morning is 4 hours away now. 3 hours. 2. The children will grow up in this same cottage, walk these same muddy lanes, attend this same chapel. Gwilym will probably start in the pit at 10 or 12, despite your vague hopes otherwise. Mary might work in a sorting shed until she marries another miner. Nest, too. And their children will do the same. The village perpetuates itself through generations, replacing dead miners with their sons in an endless cycle of extraction. There's a dark joke that circulates among miners. What do you call a coal miner's son? A coal miner. It's funny because it's true. Occupational inheritance isn't just common, it's nearly universal. Not because sons particularly want to follow fathers, but because no other options exist. The knocker-upper will tap soon. You'll rise, dress, descend. You'll swing the pick, fill the drams, breathe the dust. You'll come home exhausted, eat inadequate food, sleep poorly. Tuesday will be identical. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Saturday you'll collect inadequate wages. Sunday you'll pretend to rest while really just recovering enough to do it again. This is the rest of your life. This is the only life there is. The tap comes right on schedule. You rise from bed and place your feet on the cold slate floor, and this time, this Monday morning that feels identical to every Monday morning before it, you notice something different. Not in the circumstances, which remain uniformly grim, but in your awareness of the small things that exist despite the grimness. Or maybe because of it. Sometimes beauty only becomes visible when framed by its opposite. Catherine has already coaxed the fire back to life, and the particular way the light catches her face as she concentrates on the kettle. Lines of worry around her eyes, yes, but also a stubborn set to her jaw that speaks of relentless competence. This is beautiful in a way that oil paintings in London galleries could never capture. She's keeping 5 people alive on 6 shillings a week, and the force of will required for that daily miracle deserves recognition, even if she'll never receive it from anyone official. The tea she hands you is weak, and the mug is chipped, but it's warm in your cold hands, and she's remembered exactly how you like it without needing to ask. 28 years of marriage creates this kind of intimate knowledge. The small ways you care for each other when grand. Gestures are impossible. Outside, you join the familiar stream of men heading downhill toward the pit, and yes, it's the same brutal commute it always is. But today you notice Dafydd falling into step beside you, and the companionship is real even if neither of you speaks. You've worked together for 3 years, trusted each other with your lives in darkness and danger, and that bond matters. Not in ways that show up in wage calculations, but in ways that make survival bearable. The descent into the pit is still terrifying. That moment when the cage drops and your stomach protests and 400 feet of nothing opens beneath your feet. But you've made this descent thousands of times and not died, and there's a stubborn pride in that survival. You're still here. Still breathing even if it's coal dust you're breathing, still working even if the work is destroying you. Underground, the darkness is absolute beyond your lamp's small circle of light. But within that circle, you can see the coal face, the grain of the rock, the particular way this seam fractures when you hit it just right. You've developed expertise at something, even if that something is extracting coal in impossible conditions. The skill matters, even if it's not valued properly. At midday, during the break, Dafydd shares a joke about the overman that's not particularly funny, but makes you both laugh anyway, and that laughter, genuine, shared, a moment of levity in literal darkness, is worth something. The human capacity to find humour in awful circumstances is either our greatest strength or our most tragic adaptation, but either way, it's keeping you sane. There's a moment in the afternoon when a young boy, one of the hurriers, passes your section, and you remember being that boy, and you realise that despite everything, you've survived long enough to become the older miner, the one with experience and stories. You've made it further than some. That's not nothing. Evening. Ascending from the pit, the sunset catches the valley in that particular Welsh way, where even coal smoke turns golden in the right light. The slag heap is still a poisonous mountain of waste, but from this angle, in this light, it's almost sculptural. Beauty finding cracks in industrial devastation, insisting on existing anyway. Home, and Gwilym runs to meet you at the door with a child's uncomplicated joy at his father's return. He doesn't yet understand that you smell like death and will probably die young. Right now, you're just Dar, returned safely from the mysterious place where fathers go during daylight. His hug is sticky, he's been eating something, and fierce, and it anchors you to the present moment in a way that prevents existential despair from taking full hold. Dinner is the same thin call it always is, but Catherine has managed to include a bit more meat this week, probably through some complex barter arrangement with neighbours, and the warmth of it settles in your stomach and reminds you that you're still alive, still capable of tasting things, still here. Thursday's choir practice. You remember the moment when all the voices locked into perfect harmony on Tidorem Ronda, and the sound was so beautiful it made your chest tight with something that wasn't coal dust. That moment of transcendence, brief but real, proves that beauty can exist even here, even now, even in the valley that industry has claimed. There's a quirky resilience that humans possess, the ability to find joy in fragments, to construct meaning from small pleasures, to keep loving and laughing and singing even when circumstances suggest giving up would be more rational. This resilience is what keeps miners getting up every Monday morning. Not hope for better circumstances that hope died years ago, but something more fundamental. The stubborn insistence on finding moments worth living for, even within a life that's fundamentally unjust. Catherine's competence, Dafydd's companionship, Gwilym's sticky hug, the choir's harmonies, the sunset catching coal smoke and transforming it briefly into gold, the shared laughter in darkness. The cup of tea made exactly right. These aren't compensation for suffering. Don't mistake them for that. The suffering is real and unjust and should not exist. But within the suffering, these small joys are also real. You lie in bed Sunday night, knowing Monday is coming, knowing the cycle will continue, knowing your lungs are slowly failing and your children face the same grinding existence. But you also know that tomorrow Catherine will make tea, Dafydd will walk beside you, someone will make a joke, and the work gang will sing while descending the shaft. The beauty is stubborn, the joy is defiant, the love persists, and somehow, impossibly, that's enough to rise on Monday morning and do it all again. So that's your week in a 19th century Welsh mining village, and now it's time to let all of that weight settle gently away from you. The lamp flames are guttering lower now, the coal dust is clearing from the air, and somewhere far above the darkness there's still sky and stars and the quiet promise that morning will come, as it always does. You don't need to carry the heaviness of those tunnels with you into sleep. The struggles of those miners, the stubborn persistence of those families, the small beautiful moments found in impossible darkness, all of it can rest now, preserved in history but released from your mind as you drift toward your own rest. Their story is told. Your part in witnessing it is complete. Let the sounds of the pit wheel fade. The creaking of timber support softening into silence. The voices of the choir dissolving into the warm hush of a room, growing dimmer and quieter with each slow breath you take. Catherine's careful hands, Gwilym's sticky embrace, Dafydd's quiet companionship, the golden light catching on coal smoke. These images can blur now at their edges, becoming softer and less distinct, like watercolours bleeding gently into one another until only the feeling remains, and then even that feeling grows light and distant and easy to release. The village terraces are settling into their evening silence. The chapel windows are dark. The valleys are filling with gentle shadows that erase the hard edges of industrial life, smoothing everything into the peaceful indistinction of approaching dreams. You're safe here, in this moment, far from coal dust and danger, surrounded by softness and quiet and the deep welcoming dark that asks nothing of you except rest. The story is over. The journey is complete. Everything that needed to be told has been told, and now, just sleep. Just gentle, easy, well-earned sleep. Sweet dreams.